Okay. I hope everybody's ready for this one. This is we'll start. We'll
I don't
start.
know if I am. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, Mark and I are going to talk about Hollywood and artificial intelligence.
Could not be a hotter topic.
Could not be a hotter topic. We are going to talk about things surrounding the strike currently in Hollywood, but we're not going to talk about it directly. So please don't get confused. We're not taking an opinion on that, and nor should we, because there are many parts of that that have nothing to do with AI and that we don't necessarily understand ourselves. First question from Atif Raza. What part of Hollywood's business model will feel the most disruption due to AI?
So there's kind of two different layers of this, that we should, I think, talk about. And they're kind of together, but they're kind of separate. So one is the disruptions to the Hollywood business model that were already happening before AI,
due to streaming.
Due to streaming. And so the strikes that are happening, and just for people who haven't been tracking this currently today, both the writers and the actors in Hollywood, both of their unions are on strike. And so, all production right now in LA is in Hollywood, and in American entertainment is essentially shut down. And the strikes started as strikes over streaming, and they started out as strikes over the changes to the business model of Hollywood and the business model of, in this case, the writers and the actors. And how they make money and how much money they make and how, so forth, what rights they have. The strike started around those changes. And then kind of as the strike was gearing up a few months ago, the AI, kind of thing hit. And all of a sudden you started seeing all these examples, online of people starting to use AI to put together, short movies and write scripts, or drafts of scripts, or, do other kinds of things. And so the strikes have kind of morphed from a streaming strike into an AI strike kind of in mid stride. And so these issues are kind of, in other words, like there would have been this strike just on the basis of the changes to the streaming thing. So maybe we should just start there. And it's a little bit off from the AI topic, but I think it's the foundation of what's happening right now in the entertainment industry, which basically what's happening. And I have a question for you kind of coming up in this, Ben. What's happening basically is that, the Hollywood business model, it's always changed. Like it's changed a lot over the last 100 years. It used to be based on live entertainment, then it became based on recorded entertainment, right? And then it became based on, at some point, video cassette, VHS rentals, and then later on DVD sales. And then of course, TV reruns and syndication and so forth. So there are all these kind of historical kind of changes to the model, but basically things had settled into kind of a pretty nice groove as far as a lot of people in Hollywood were concerned, kind of basically right before streaming.
No, the DVD thing was, awesome.
Yeah, so TV shows basically started to have three streams of revenue. They had their first run revenue when they were first on the air. Then they had reruns, what's called syndication. So reruns and syndication, where they were sold, in later years for airing, by other people later on. And then the DVD sales was this huge boon. And so and then movies, very similar. They sold through what were called the windows. And so you would go see a movie. If you wanted to see a movie when it first came out, you would buy a movie ticket. And then there was another window a few months later, which was pay-per-view. Right. And then, through cable or satellite TV services. And then ultimately those movies would be sold for TV distribution and for DVD sales. And so there were actually probably like 4 revenue streams for movies. And basically what happened to streaming is it sort of collapsed all that down into just streaming. Right. And so now, most movies come out on streaming or cut over to streaming right away. Most TV shows come out on streaming or cut over to streaming right away. And basically the economics of streaming are very different because the streaming model is obviously very different to start with, which is it's sort of a flat monthly fee for kind of all you can watch. Exactly. And then the other thing is like there's no premium price, effectively no premium pricing within the streaming services. And so any given TV show or movie, they don't charge you extra, like it's part of that bundle. And so what happened is basically streaming looked like it went from looking like it was another boon to the producers and creators of entertainment, it looked like it was like a 4th or 5th revenue stream that was going to be additive. And instead what happened is it basically turned entertainment into a flat fee business. And so today, if you make a movie or TV show for streaming, you get paid a flat fee to make that movie or TV show, and then there's never any upside after that. Right. And in fact, a lot of the production of what's happened in Hollywood has gone over to what they call a cost plus model, which is you're literally the people who make the movie or TV show are paid the cost like plus 10%.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Almost like it's like a general. It's like building a
Yeah,
house or
general
something. It's like
contractor, a consultant, that kind of thing. Yeah.
exactly right. Exactly. And so your general contractor does not get the upside from when you sell the house later for more money. And in this same way, the people making movies or TV shows now don't get the upside if it's a big hit on streaming. And then the streaming guys pre-buy all the rights, and so they pre-buy basically all the rights in perpetuity as part of the deal. So there's never any ancillary revenue, and of course, people aren't buying DVDs anymore because everything's just on streaming. And so here's what's interesting. And here's the question for you, Ben,
Yeah.
that I've been really fascinated by. So all through all of these changes, basically over the last 70 or 80 years, where sometimes movies and TV shows are great businesses, sometimes they're bad businesses, and sometimes they get repeated strikes and all these things. People trying to figure this out. Like it's the same product, right? It's
Yeah.
the format, the product format of a movie or TV show is unchanged from like 70 years ago. And so it's like all of the change, the changes have been driven around technology, but all the changes are like in the microeconomics of the business and on the ability for different people in that market to extract greater or lesser levels of profit or profit sharing or participation,
Right.
or,
Who
or
gets
drive.
the money? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so who gets the money seems like it's amazing how many shifts there have been for who gets the money relative to the fact that it's actually the same product. And
Yeah.
so it raises a question. And then both outsiders to the business, as well as actually people on the inside of Hollywood, including people like the studio heads, who in theory are have the most information on all this, they have had a very hard time predicting where this all goes. Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of these changes to the economics of the business have actually been very surprising to people. So how do you, like, if you're a CEO in a business like this, like how do you think about the fact that the actual basic economics of the business might whip around dramatically, even with the product not changing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And in the kind of Hollywood business, they actually saw the precursor, of course, in the music business.
Right.
Which went through. By the way, the music format also hasn't changed since sheet music, right? There's a big change from sheet music to recorded music, just like there's a big change from plays to kind of recorded, scripted entertainment. But that's been the only kind of change that's been the key product change. There have been subtle product changes, but essentially, it's a movie or a song. I would say the big thing that I think people didn't recognize on this last change, last distribution change, that was different, from a CEO perspective, was that in all the prior ones, you still had, in both music and in Hollywood, you had kind of this distribution scarcity thing that was very, very powerful and useful, and made, by the way, the distributors incredibly powerful, because there were only so many hours of broadcast television. There's only so many hours on the radio that you could get your song on. And that, who controlled those hours was very, very important, and then could create, a tremendous amount of kind of revenue. Once you went to this internet model of abundance, and there is no scarcity of distribution, I think that change was not like the others. And so that's why people, in my view, that's why people got caught with their pants down. So yeah, look, when CDs came out and DVDs came out, it was all like, it's like those were the biggest boom times in those industries that they'd ever seen, because they had all the money from before and then more money. And so everybody got paid and that kind of trickled down to the artists, who also kind of made more than they ever made before. And then you go to this streaming kind of internet-based distribution where, guess what? Like you can put as much stuff out there as you want, and there is no kind of scarcity. And then the whole business model is different. And I think, I guess the thing that, from a CEO perspective, that was surprising to me about it, or like if I was CEO, I would have thought that I might have thought about it differently, is you saw music go through this transition. And the essential thing that happened in music was the cost structure of the record companies just proved to be absurd, given infinite distribution that anybody could get their hands on. And so what's happened in music is now I think over 70% of the artists that are the top streamers are independent. They're like outside of what you would call Hollywood in the music industry. And in the kind of Hollywood game, the big reaction was, not to look at the cost structure at all, but just simply to basically create what the equivalent of a Spotify competitor. So I'm getting into that distribution business as opposed to I'm going to look at the content side of the business and make any changes. No changes were made to content at all. It was just like, I want a piece of the action on distribution because maybe that's where the money is. It's quite interesting, but I think I agree with you. It's a very complicated thing to think about because your product is the same. It's like, I know how to make a great movie. So like, that's always going to be worth something, but what is it worth? And then how many of them are there is the other kind of relevant question.
Yeah, so this takes us into the AI topic in a very, I think, interesting way. And let me introduce, our friend Larry Summers' favorite word here, which is fungibility.
Yes.
So fungibility is this fancy word that basically means like, is something easily substitutable or not, right? So,
Yeah.
so like U.S. dollar bills are like perfectly fungible, right? If I have a U.S. dollar bill and I trade it with you for another one, like they're exactly the same. A Rothko painting is not fungible, right? There's only one. Right. And either I have it or you have it, and there's no substitute for it. Right.
Or an NFT.
Or an NFT, exactly right,
Yeah,
not literally non-fungible token. So there's always this question of anything involving like economic production, economic value. There's this sort of question of fungibility, and a way to think about it is, things that are perfectly fungible are kind of pure commodities, right? So dollar bills, grains of rice, right? Things that are non-substitutable, things for which there is no substitute. You either have the thing or you don't. Right. Are like perfectly non-fungible. So a couple things. So one is there's an interesting difference between the streaming music business and the streaming video business, which, and I forget who said this, but somebody came up with this idea years ago when these companies like Netflix and Spotify were getting going, which is there's a big difference in the economics of Netflix and Spotify driven as follows. The brand promise of Spotify is it's all the music. Right. And so if Spotify doesn't have the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or Frank Sinatra or Madonna or Lady Gaga, like that's a big problem. And, Spotify's big challenge as a business was figuring out how to get rights to all the music. So Netflix's brand promise this whole time has never been, we have all the TV shows and movies, and they never have. The brand promise is literally the way that they describe it, I think, is it's something like there's always something to watch. And then, of course, content comes on and off of Netflix and the other streaming services all the time, consistent with that. And so the customers of Netflix have been trained to basically not complain, or at least not complain too hard when they show up, next Tuesday and some piece of content is gone because there's more content. They'll just show you something else. And so maybe let's pause on that. Like, is that dichotomy of you either have everything or you just have this, like maybe there's something good. Is that dichotomy, Ben, in your view, is that inherent to the difference between like video entertainment and music, or is that actually somewhat arbitrary?
I think it's turned out to be arbitrary. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but I remember speaking to one of the big streaming CEOs on the music side, and I believe over 98% of what's streamed has been released in the last 18 months. So the whole catalog idea was probably wrong. And then the other thing that happened, interestingly, in music was there was this company, SoundCloud, that didn't have the catalog, that kind of just had independent music that was doing very well. And then because people also uploaded catalog songs, they kind of got sued by the labels and became a catalog thing, and the business died. But there was a real thing in there, which was you didn't actually need everything. That I think was a misperception that just turned out to be really probably wrong in retrospect. It's hard to tell because you can't run the counterfactual, but but it is different. Like it's indifferent in practice. So as a matter of fact, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music all have the catalog today. So that is what it is. Although that's changing because as I said, 70% of what people want to listen to is independent artists. And nobody has the independent artist catalog. It just depends, what they use, United Masters or DistroKid or whatever, to put on those services and which services they put them on. And there are, I think, 38 or 40 reasonably significant streaming services out there today.
So is the theory basically on the first part of that, the new music part of it, is the theory that basically, and on like in a parallel universe, right, on Earth 2, is there a version of Spotify that's actually a better business because they give you, they basically, their brand promise would be, we have all of the new music?
I think so, because I think that, look, the main people who listen to music and and of course streaming music, although I think most people do now, unless you're really old, are young people. Like, I mean, like the music has always been 17 to 25 or 16 to 25 or 12 to 25 years old. And you always find, I mean, I find that if you run into a person who's not like super into music and you ask them what they like to listen to, it's literally what they listened to when they were like 18 years old. And you know, it's like, oh, I love Bruce Springsteen. I'm like, oh, okay, great, that's awesome. You know, but that's just, you know, Bruce Springsteen is awesome. Well, it's no problem with that. But the idea that you need a streaming service with like literally everything on it to listen to Bruce Springsteen, like the packaging was wrong. Like the segmentation in music streaming, I think went in a bad direction and never came back.
So this then takes us to the AI topic, and there's a lot to talk about on the AI, AI creating content, creating TV shows and movies and music and everything else. There's a lot of details to this, but let's start with one of the like really, really big questions, which relates directly to what we've been talking about, which is, let's just assume for the moment that AI is going to be able to create music and movies and TV shows over time. Like, one of the big questions that a lot of people have, well, it's actually they usually express it as a statement, but it's like, okay, so how creative is AI, right? And so there's sort of this thing where people kind of set this bar and they kind of say, well, could AI make The Godfather, right? Or, could AI make The Sopranos? In other words, like the really non-fungible content, like the real creative, content, one of a kind, Star Wars.
Original, like brand new idea, not the 37th sequel or the next Marvel movie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like if I want to, here'd be a great example. If I want to watch a mob movie, right, there's like 1,000 to pick from. And yeah. Netflix will recommend me a mob movie, and it'll probably be a pretty good movie about the mob. And I'm going to be pretty happy because I wanted to see a mob movie. If I want to see The Godfather, right? Like, I don't want to see a knockoff, right? I don't want to see like The Godnephew, right? Like, I want to see like I want to see the real thing, right? So there's this division, right, between another example would be I want to hear Lady Gaga's newest single versus I just want to hear some good dance music, right?
Yeah.
Right. So this is this division between fungible and non-fungible. So let's say hypothetically, AI is actually not capable for the moment of making the truly non-fungible content. So there's no AI Godfather, Star Wars, Lady Gaga coming out anytime soon.
Right. Which is the current state of the art on AI writing and so forth. I would put in that category.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption, at least, let's say at least for a while. Like even AI optimists would probably say at least for a while. So, but let's say AI actually gets good at making the fungible stuff, right? So it gets good at making, sort of quote unquote generic mob movies. It gets good at making, dance music and so forth. Like, is the consumer reaction to that going to be, okay, great, more fungible content? And they're going to just start to basically listen and watch kind of indistinguishably between basically fungible content created by people and fungible content created by AI. Well, let's start there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a couple of things to that. I think that it'll probably show up as a component first. There's a kind of certain kind of genre of rap music where, like, okay, there's a class of beats that are all very fungible. Like, rap over the beat, and then the thing that is kind of non-fungible is the lyrics themselves. And I think that's already starting to happen. And my understanding is, in China, it's actually like a pretty big phenomenon is like AI will be the track, but it won't be the lyrics. There's a part that was fungible anyway on the non-fungible technology, and that just makes it easier to do. And I could imagine that happening very quickly in scripts as well. It's like, okay, there's the super stylized, like amazing dialogue here, the plot idea, this character development. And then there's a scene that's kind of an essential scene, but whatever, the writer's tired and doesn't want to write. Like, it's a very simple dialogue. I went to a restaurant, the waitress asked me something, what's the order for your food? I just didn't feel like writing that and like have the AI write it. So I think that'll happen right away. In terms of like complete end-to-end AI content. So the thing to me that's interesting about that, like, humans are obsessed with humans. Absolutely fucking, like, totally obsessed with humans. So like a cheetah's been able to run faster than a human forever, but we only watch humans run against humans. We never watch cheetahs run. The AI can destroy humans in chess. We never watch AI play AI in chess. We only watch humans play humans in chess. And on and on and on and on. We're only interested in, like, they may be smarter, better, can write better, but like we're only interested in each other for whatever reason. So I think that's like a pretty fundamental thing. Like I'm not sure, and it's hard to say. And can you tell? But like one of the things that you've observed, Mark, and that I think is very true, is that the intelligence in AI is very exciting and interesting and so forth, but it's very different also. Like it doesn't quite work like a human, although it's good at mirroring humans and this and that and the other. But like if it became like super original, what would that be? And I mean, it'll be interesting to see.
So it all begs this question for me, and I agree with a lot of what you said, but let me push on it a little bit. So it begs this question. It's the same question for me that came up around self-driving cars. Mm-hmm. The question around self-driving cars was, how do you evaluate them? Does the self-driving car need to be perfect? Or does it just need to be better than the average human driver?
And so far, the answer has been depending if it's Elon or Google, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And so, so basically Tesla and Waymo, these are great examples, and these are very topical because Waymo finally just got, approval to roll out, full robotaxi service in San Francisco, in 2023, which was a lot further down the road than a lot of people thought. But the Google Waymo kind of philosophy this whole time has been something like, it needs to be perfect. The Tesla philosophy this whole time has been, it just needs to be better than humans. And Tesla has, by the way, a way of measuring that, which is accidents per 1,000 miles driven. Basically, they when they first rolled out their self-driving capability, at least what I believe they said at the time was, it's like twice as good. There's like half as many accidents per 1,000 miles. And then over time, it's just gotten better and better and better. And there are still accidents, but like it now, I don't even know what the current numbers is, but it's something like 5 or 10 times fewer accidents per 1,000 miles. And so it's kind of vectoring towards something approximating perfect at some point in the future, but like
one day
that wasn't the requirement to like take it to market. And so to me, like, I think the thing I would push on, for you is like, okay, I'm watching a detective show. Like, look, a lot of people, I'll just take detective shows as an example. Like a lot of people love detective shows. There are these long running franchise shows like Law and Order, right? That have, many spinoffs. And, for a lot of people, they're like, the term they use is like, it's like comfort food television, right? It's like an episode of Law and Order or CSI or something at the end of a long day is like a relaxing thing. It's like a little, it's like a little Agatha Christie little puzzle box thing, and it's fun, right? But
your brain doesn't have to be fully on, like you're watching Oppenheimer.
Exactly right. And part of why it is good, and by the way, some other episodes are incredibly well crafted and so forth. But like generally speaking, there's a formula to it. Right. Mm-hmm. And they stick to the formula like pretty closely. The CBS broadcast television network was was the most successful broadcast network for a very long time because they leaned the hardest into this philosophy, which is you basically have a formula for these kinds, what they call procedural shows. And so if an AI can write a Law and Order script, right, that is basically fits into the formula, and if it, let's say it quote unquote passes the Turing test, which is if I watch it, I can't tell if it's written by a human or written by the machine. Yeah. Like, does it still matter?
Probably not. I mean, it's a little like, Muzak, or if you've ever been to Europe, you'll go to a like bar or restaurant and they'll have an Adele song, but it won't be Adele singing it. It'll just be somebody else so they can get around the licensing. Yeah. And like, it's fine. Like whatever, you're in a restaurant, you know the song, you don't know the singer. She can't sing as well as Adele, but whatever. So I do think there's probably a lane for that. It's it'll be, like that's one of the craziest, hardest jobs are writing those things. Well, like soap operas, which is I would say maybe the ultimate comfort entertainment. Those writers are writing like whole hour episodes every day, right. For a year. Like, so it's a great kind of exercise, but it's, no, it's not like a pure creative endeavor. And I think that those kinds of things, I could certainly imagine being substituted if AI got good enough.
Right. So then if you think about what it means to be a creative professional in this field, and by the way, it's going to sound here like we're picking on Hollywood, but the same question applies to many other areas. And by the way,
programming is already happening, right? Like it's already happened in programming, right? Oh, I need to write a JBDC driver, to connect to Salesforce.com. Right. Okay, a lot of that can be written by an AI that's been written before.
Right. So this kind of, I would propose here, you got to kind of turn the Turing test around, and you got to kind of evaluate let's say the typical professional programmer, product manager, designer. Hollywood screenwriter, right? By the way, Hollywood graphic artist, so forth, right? The people who have these jobs today is like, okay, how many of them are actually better than, the AI that can just do kind of the basic thing? Like how many, in other words, like there are many professional screenwriters who would love to write another movie like The Godfather, that at least they haven't been able to so far in their careers, just like there are a lot of programmers who would like to write the next, big breakthrough and haven't yet figured it out. But like, look, they write great material. It's just like, okay, at some point, if the AI gets good at the formula, and if from the audience standpoint, the material is indistinguishable, like what becomes the bar at that point for the writer? And we'll get to actors in a moment, but what becomes the bar for the writer to be able to continue to have a job, right? If there literally is the machine that can sort of write the equivalent thing.
Although this kind of can go back to the original conversation about, okay, now we have infinite distribution.
Right.
And so is then the answer become, well, every one of these writers who was the 8th writer on Young and the Restless is now a showrunner. That's using a team of AIs and creating their own show. And even if that show has a small audience, they can get to that audience of 1,000 viewers. And maybe that's the job. And maybe that's a better job. Right. And if they do something truly great, then it'll go much, much further. And so, do you get to an independent Hollywood in the same way that you're getting to independent music? And is the real answer that there's just way, way, way more content, and it's content for literally everybody, and nobody has to complain that there's not enough, 6'2" Jewish people in the movie or whatever the complaint is, because that's going to be out there because everybody is writing. And then, maybe there won't be as many blockbuster kind of massive mega hits, but there'll be something for everybody. So maybe it just changes the nature of the game. But that's a really interesting question. It's hard I always hesitate to say, okay, this is going to shrink or grow employment, because it's always easy to see how it shrinks employment. It's very hard to, predict how it's going to grow employment. And this was true for computers. Everybody could see all the typesetters were going away. Right. But all the jobs that were created was very, like all the graphics design jobs, the product management jobs, all the jobs that you and I deal with weren't jobs before computers. Like they're all new jobs. But yet everybody knew every damn job that was going away as soon as the computer came out. It's like, oh my God, we don't have that anymore. And so I think that, in the creative space that may be similar.
Yeah. And there's this history here. So that my favorite example of this, as you talked about the music industry earlier, but typically the entertainment industry has fought every new technology.
Even the VCR, the ones that were amazing for them, they tried to kill the VCR so hard.
So the VCR comes out, and the VCR comes out. People don't remember what this was like at the time, but this is in the early '80s, and this is when the Japan was like ascendant in the American imagination and the global economy. Right, the same way China is now, and there was this huge fear that the Japanese had figured out a superior economic system and were going to take over all of technology. And then Sony, which at the time, what a lot of people would have said was probably the kind of the best company in the world, the most innovative company doing the most interesting things. Sony came out with a VCR, and actually, ironically, is the wrong format, but there was that issue, but they came out with that idea, and then a lot of other Japanese companies followed, and that ultimately led to VHS, and things like Blockbuster. But when that first came out, to your point, the reaction from Hollywood was total freak out, because and basically it was the piracy argument. It was like, oh my God, people are gonna record these things, and then there go reruns. There, it's the piracy is just gonna kill us. And so Jack Valenti, who ran the big Producers Guild, the MPA, the MPAA at the time, and Jack Valenti was this legend of Washington D.C., where he had been LBJ's kind of main guy, policy guy, and so he was this legend in D.C. And so he goes to Capitol Hill and testifies, and basically advocating for a law to ban the VCR. And his famous line was basically the Japanese invention of the VCR is to Hollywood what the Boston Strangler is to the woman who's home alone.
That's a great line.
So the point is like, look, and again, like this is not to pick on Hollywood, like, the many industries, including the tech industry itself, is kind of faced with these questions. But you do get these new technologies, as you said, they look like they're going to be destructive. It often turns out that they actually massively expand the business. Like the VCR expanded, VCR, I think, doubled the size of Hollywood, right? Which was already large to start with, and that led to a cornucopia of money, that flowed to everybody, including the talent, but also the studios. And in fact, right, it's the withdrawal essentially of that money, right, in the form of DVDs, because VCR rentals turned into, videotape rentals turned into DVD sales. It's the withdrawal of that money that's prompted the current strike. So the same thing that they were scared of 30 years ago, right, turned out to be the thing that they're very sad that it's going away today. To your point, like, and this is what I've been telling my friends, like my Hollywood writer friends, is basically like, look, I think there's a really good chance here that AI is a giant expansion of the entertainment industry. And I think you gave the perfect case study, and I'll describe it in my words, which is, if you're a talented screenwriter, right, within some number of years here, I think relatively short number of years, you're going to have a tool on your laptop, right, that basically is like you work with it, you basically write your script, kind of with the AI, and then as you're writing your script, the AI is actually generating the show or the movie. Right. And so it's literally like rendering the thing. It's doing the voices. It's putting in the actors. It's like, it's doing the scenes. It's like literally generating everything. And, in the same way that people who make music today have tools on the laptops where they do this, like that's what's going to happen. And so everybody with writing talent, everybody with creative talent is going to be able to actually make movies on their laptops. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think really good movies. So I think that's right. It's an interesting thing. The most likely is it's going to shift the economic power from the distributors and the kind of the studios to the creatives in a really major way that probably hasn't happened, since the kind of rise of CAA and the kind of the bargaining power that they created with packaging and these kinds of things. That's probably the most likely. It's interesting because the Hollywood structure is kind of based on kind of a distribution monopoly that was deemed a monopoly, which kind of separated the movie theaters from the studios. And then the natural reaction to that was the unions, the Screen Actors Guild and whatnot, because you're dealing with a monopoly, an oligopoly. It's the only way you can get kind of a square deal. And all of those things kind of get undermined, changed, flipped around by a technology that makes, or two technologies. One, infinite distribution available to anybody, basically free of charge. And then secondly, the dramatic drop in the cost of production. And so if you put those two things together, I think it does kind of start to look much more like where the music industry is today, because that's basically what's happened in music.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got this interesting kind of balance of power thing on the creative side, and I'll come back to the studios in a second. But this interesting balance of power thing on the creative side, and let me describe how I mean it. So let's assume this is the world we're moving into, where anybody who wants to is going to have a tool in their laptop for making an entire movie. So in tech world, we described a few minutes ago how there's basically these jobs like programmer and designer and product manager who come together to build a tech product. And you can kind of think about them as analogous a little bit to like screenwriter, actor, director, right, for making a movie. Right. Yep. It's like a triangle, kind of, combination. In tech world, the running joke is basically that the programmers now all think they don't need designers or product managers because they think the AI can do those jobs. The designers now think they don't need programmers or product managers, and the product managers don't think they need programmers or designers.
Yep.
Right. Because each
and
of them,
maybe they're all right.
And maybe right. Exactly. And by the way, they all think they no longer need a CEO. Right. So
also possibly correct.
or a venture capitalist.
Yes.
So if you extend that kind of question into the Hollywood, kind of thing, and if you think again about the triangle format, it's like, okay, if you're a screenwriter, do you actually need actors and directors anymore? Can the AI do that? By the way, if you're a director, do you actually need the screenwriters? Because if the AI can write the thing, and so maybe the director makes a movie on his laptop and the AI writes the script. By the way, if you're an actor, right, maybe you think you're the essential element, right? Because to your point, like people are drawn to people, and like it's a movie featuring me, and that's the draw. And now I have an AI that can actually do the writing and the directing, right? And I just show up and do the acting. And so there's this interesting kind of three-way kind of standoff question, right, of ultimately where that lands. And by the way, again, to your point, like it's possible the answer is all of the above, right? It's
Yeah.
possible that all of a sudden each of those points of the triangle are going to have actual total creative freedom whenever they want it, because they're going to be able to have AI partners to do those other jobs.
That's certainly a real possibility. I just kind of again emphasize how unpredictable this all is, in that I think in before automation, like if you go back all the way before automation entirely in say the 1700s, almost all the jobs, like well over 90% of the jobs, were agriculture, and none of the jobs that we have today existed. And so, I think that if you were a farmer in those days, you could not possibly imagine, if you automated farming,
right,
what the hell anybody would do. Like, if you have food, like, is everybody building houses at that point? Is that the only other thing? Because those were the only things. And so I think that, in the creative space, I think it's such a big space that the exact things, you may not need a key grip or a best boy or whatever those things are. I still don't know what those jobs actually are. There will be other opportunities, hopefully much more interesting jobs. I think there's, there couldn't be, a less interesting job than plowing a field. So I think, I'm very optimistic in that sense.
So that takes us to another scenario, and it goes back to a point you raised earlier, which is basically people people have a high affinity for seeing and dealing with other people. So there's another possibility, which is that there's going to be this complementarity effect, where purely human created entertainment is all of a sudden going to be at a premium.
Yeah.
And let me just, and this is very paradoxical because this sounds like the opposite of everything that we've been saying, but let me describe what I mean. So let's start from history. So when cars arrived, like, horses no longer were the main form of transportation on a daily basis, and the horse population shrunk a lot.
Yeah.
But horses became a luxury good, right?
Still
are, right?
Yeah.
The richest, many rich people and their kids are like super into horses. Another example of that is in clothing, like the best suit, right, or the best pair of leather shoes is not from a machine. It's from a craftsperson working in a village in Italy somewhere, building it the way that, or making it the way they made it 500 years ago, right? The most expensive men's shoes are purely handmade, right?
Yes.
And they are the most expensive because they're purely handmade. They're purely handmade because they are the more expensive. Like, that's an integral part of the thing. In fact, right, there's this thing I don't know if it's the same as true in women's fashion. There's this thing in men's fashion where you actually, the way that you know that something is actually superior, right, and costs more, is that it actually has like irregular stitching, because it's evidence that it was actually stitched by a person. And so you get these things. And by the way, your music, right, you could say a similar thing, which is like recorded music basically is a less good form of economics for a lot of performers than it used to be. The concert, people love going to concerts, right?
The concert economics dwarf the streaming economics. Even for a massive streamer like Taylor Swift, her tour, I think she was doing like, I'm trying to remember the number, but just in merchandise, she was doing like $1.5 million a show.
Right.
And then, you've got tickets and all that kind of thing on top of that and all the knock-on effects. Right. So yes, yeah, right. Like, that is already in the music industry. And I think like touring is way, way premium to the recording.
Yeah. And so you mentioned like the other jobs, like, best boy and key grip, like it, which is sort of literally the people who like physically construct stages, right? And, and sets for, for movies that aren't made in CGI. It may be that there is this basically much more pure form of the art, where basically the promise of it actually is, no, this is actually all people. Like this has actually been crafted for you. And there's actually a blockbuster version of this, which is Christopher Nolan movies, where Christopher Nolan makes this huge point when he makes movies of having, and he famously for Oppenheimer was actually a case of this. He said there are no, I forget what he said. I think he said there's no CGI in Oppenheimer. I don't know. They might have done some background work, but he said basically everything you see.
Even for blowing up the nuke.
Yeah. So that all of the explosions, all of the physical, all the cut scenes that he had with all of those like amazing, kind of physical, geometric patterns and, all those sort of fires and everything, like that was all practical, like that was all real. And so it may be that there's this thing on the other side, right? And maybe it's a bigger part of the business or smaller, I don't know, but it may be that, I'm quite positive this will be a thing on the other side. I don't know how big it will be, but I'm quite positive it will be a thing, which is, no, I'm watching a movie that's actually made the way people made movies in 1970, not the way people do it with machines. And like, I don't have to wonder as I'm sitting there, like, okay, is this real? Is this not real? Like, because the realness is kind of inherent to it.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this other side of it where I think that's going to become, I think ironically, like there's a good chance that becomes the premium part of the business. Like it may be that those become the expensive movies, and the stuff made by computer becomes the inexpensive movies.
That seems very correct to me. I mean, I think that, AI being able to fill in the robotic jobs very quickly will be, because like you can't build a better robot than a robot, and a human can't be a better robot than a robot. But for everything else, it does feel like even ultimately that's where it will land.
Good. Well, I feel like we beat. This was question number 1. So I feel like we've.
All right. I got a 2-part question for you from Tom. What is the absolute worst case, most dystopian scenario for Hollywood once AI becomes the norm? And what is the best case, most futuristic scenario?
Okay. I hope everybody's ready for this one. This is we'll start.
I don't know if I am.
We'll start with the dark side. Okay, so here's the dark side. So the idea of creation, the idea of creating narratives and stories and music, right, in art forms, television, movies, novels, poems. Like typically when we talk about them in the creative realm, the literary realm, the audiovisual realm. We talk about how entertaining they are and how inspiring they are, or how depressing they are, or how horrifying they are, whatever. They're funny, and we talk about them at kind of this level of the way that we experience them kind of consciously. But there is another level, and it's the level of physiology. It's the level of biology. And it's the level of neurochemistry, right? And so our mind, we have a conscious experience that we describe, with words like, emotions, but then there's this neurochemical biological component, right, to how we operate, where when we experience a sensation like happiness or fear or, anger or, laughter, humor, whatever, like there are biochemical processes happening. Like there are hormones flowing and there are electrical impulses moving through the brain, and there are areas of the brain that get specifically triggered, right? So the amygdala, for example, gets triggered for, for emotion processing. And then there's, other areas that get triggered for things like stress and fight or flight and so forth. Right. And in fact, and so basically, like if you view it like from a mechanistic standpoint, like what any entertainment experience is physiologically is it's basically taking the brain and the nervous system on a roller coaster ride. Right. And so if you think about like the narrative structure of the classic, the hero's journey or the 3-act structure of a movie or something like that, like basically there are these narrative patterns, or you're composing a piece of music, right? There are these narrative patterns of like building tension, releasing tension, building anger, catharsis, and then, humor,
formula.
Revenge. Yeah, there are formulas, and the formulas aren't just intellectual or creative formulas. They're also literally like biophysical formulas. The same thing is true of music. Like music draws out emotions and feelings in us because at the biological level, like it's triggering these kind of neural reactions. And so if you talk to people or you read the research on people who have studied this, like we kind of know how this works, but most creative professionals I've talked to are not specifically thinking in terms of optimizing for like the biochemical experience.
It's about like literally programming our chemicals.
Exactly. Whereas the machines, like an AI, would actually find that to be, a relatively straightforward thing to do, right? And it would not be emotional about it, and it wouldn't view, right, of course, that there's anything wrong with doing this. It seems if it makes the humans happy, then it's the right thing to do. And so you could imagine AI algorithms for creating screenplays and songs that basically are essentially programming human neurochemical biology. And then the dystopian version of this is in the optimal possible state, right? So basically the AI gets so good at creating entertainment that basically programs our biology so perfectly that it's like, from a physical standpoint, the idealized perfect version of an entertainment experience, but yet has basically been, sort of stripped of all higher aspirations. But it would be like, I don't know, it'd be like the entertainment equivalent of like eating Cheetos or something. It's like the ultimate engineered, amazing, fantastic, food.
Nothing is more delicious than a Cheeto.
Exactly. But yet, like, do you really want to live in and Cheetos are fine for a treat, but like, do you really want to live in a world in which everybody's only eating Cheetos all the time?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question as it gets into that idea with originality, right? Where, you don't actually get the same feeling from watching a movie the 177th time as you do the first time. And kind of watching the same formula in a movie for the 177th time, I wonder, it does make you wonder, like, does the sameness start to get you of the pattern?
So here's here's the argument why actually. So if you watch the same movie 177 times, like yeah, at some point you've seen it before, or you kind of see all the twists and turns coming. Like it's not, some movies are fun to rewatch, but like you kind of know what's happening, right? So the dark version of this is what you just described though already happens, for decades, Hollywood screenwriters have known that you structure screenplays in what's called a 3-act format, right? And so it's basically, it's a consistent format. It's basically introduction, and then it's basically problem, and then it's basically resolution, right? It's actually interesting. It's like philosophically, it actually maps to.
Well, right. It's the double turn, right? Like, it's the first you get into the problem, and then the second big twist, right.
And so
screenwriting books all talk about this.
Yeah, so in philosophical terms, this is what it was called the dialectic. And so the dialectic is in philosophy, the dialectic is thesis, right? You propose an argument. There's antithesis, which is you propose a counter argument, and then there's synthesis, which is the resolution of the two. And a 3-act movie structure kind of basically works the same way. You set up the situation, you create tension in the situation, then you resolve the situation. But it actually turns out that Hollywood has actually advanced to a more detailed understanding of this in the last 20 years. And there's this book that has had a big impact on the entertainment industry called Save the Cat. And it's a book on how to write screenplays. And in Save the Cat, what he does is he goes through like 80 years of movies, and he basically discovers that there's in addition to within the 3-act format, there's actually a 15-point template that like a very large percentage of the great movies follow. And so he breaks each of the 3 acts into 5 kind of points. I think he calls the beats, right? And then basically, as a consequence, there's this 15-point basically bullet list that you can just Google and look up, and it's really interesting. And it turns out it's the same format of plot that is used for like action movies, adventure movies, horror movies, romantic comedies.
They're all the same.
It turns out they're all the same. And then there's actually another twist on Turin the Cat. The same guy who unfortunately passed away. He wrote these books and then passed away. It's one of these kind of amazing tragic stories. But he wrote a later book where I think he got it too. I forget what it was. It was like he broke it was something like he broke the 15 points down into each 3 subpoints, and so he got it to like 45 very specific points. And at least in theory, you can write. And look, you write a screenplay with this what he calls the beat sheet. Against these like 15 points. You're not of course guaranteed to write a successful movie. You're not even guaranteed to write a good movie, but you're writing a movie that takes the viewer on the emotional roller coaster that we have come to accept. And then it is shocking how many existing movies basically follow that template. And so again, it's sort of this glimpse of there's something primal to the experience that's not just what we think we're perceiving. There's something deeper that's happening. This also gets into Jungian, so-called Jungian psychology, which is this idea of archetypes, which I probably shouldn't go into at length, but basically this idea that there are these universal stories, right? And they're not just intellectual or creative exercises. They're something very fundamental to the human experience and the human kind of physical being.
Right, they always work. Yeah,
that these things wire into. Well, the hero's journey. So the classic example of that is what's called the hero's journey. So the hero's journey was a Jungian concept, basically derived from like ancient Greek, like the epics and myths, and then this guy Joseph Campbell kind of popularized it, and then like famously like Star Wars was literally templated off of the hero's journey. So the Luke Skywalker story is the hero's journey, and then Harry Potter, by the way, same thing. It's the hero's journey. It follows the exact same arc. And so a lot of screenwriters who sit down to write a movie, in kind of that mold, right, could basically use the hero's journey Jungian archetype method to do that. And so we know a lot of this already. We kind of use it a little. George Lucas uses it a little bit and so forth, but like it isn't. We're not programmed, the process by which entertainment programs the emotional state of a human being right now involves a lot of like human creativity and like, like a layer of indirection. The machines may just go straight to the straight to the biology.
To the thing. Yeah. That's interesting. I think Pharrell actually did an exercise, I believe, where he used the actual kind of state-of-the-art technological reading of the biology and wrote the song Happy, which is a massive hit. But I don't know that he's either attempted to or successfully repeated that kind of level of success with it. But
and what was it about that song? Like what specifically?
Well, I think that he programmed into, or he was attempting to program into, like a very specific emotion in terms of the music and so forth. The song is amazing that way. It works like perfectly. So perhaps he succeeded.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You talk to a lot more musicians than I do. When they, because songs take people on an emotional roller coaster, right? And they, very specifically, like they use different, chord famously, like in a lot of music, they use different chord chord progressions to get you into
Yeah.
different emotional states. And the great musicians that you know, like how consciously do they think about like the listener's emotional roller coaster, let's call it?
Oh, they're very focused on, I would say, expressing a feeling at the highest level of intensity possible. So I think that, if you're a musical artist, you're really going for a feeling, much more so. Like if you're writing a book, you sometimes go for a feeling. You're sometimes going for like an idea or convincing somebody of the logic or it. But like in music, I think at least the truly great musicians can make you feel a certain way, and like sometimes with an almost like a novel feeling that you like, wow, I never felt this way before. And so I think that, and of course there's whole genres designed around, like the blues was designed around like a very specific feeling. So I think that's a big part of it. Our friend Vinod Khosla, I think, had a tweet that got him in a lot of trouble where he said, like, there won't be any more human musicians because the AI would just program whatever feeling, however you want to feel, they just program it for you. So he kind of got right to this idea. I think he probably regrets tweeting that, but there was a point to it.
There's this candidate. I just had an experience like this with music. This is kind of a funny story, but there's this candidate running for president of Ecuador right now who's a former French Foreign Legion sniper, special forces guy. And he has been taking a combat helicopter into campaign stops, and he plays the theme music for Top Gun through the loudspeakers.
Yeah, it's a certain feeling.
And I hadn't listened to that. I've seen the Top Gun movies, but I hadn't listened to music in a long time. So I went on YouTube and I pulled it up. And if you haven't heard it recently, the theme music from Top Gun, like the hair in the back, at least in my case, the hair in the back of my neck goes straight up, right? And I can literally feel like the emotion coming out, right? And it's just like all it's all the patriotism, and then it's linked to when you saw the movie in your childhood, and like all this it's a physical rush, like it's really something.
Yeah, it's funny. So, side note, when Top Gun came out, I, for whatever reason, I was probably 18 years old, and I had lunch with Oliver Stone, who was absolutely furious about that movie because he's like, it's so powerful, and it's going to get people to sign up for the fucking military like I did. He signed up for the military. And they're going to be like rudely awakened. It's nothing like Top Gun. And then he made Platoon,
right?
Which is like the opposite of Top Gun.
The opposite of Top Gun. Yeah, because he actually, it's an interesting story. So Oliver Stone, he fought in Vietnam, right?
Yeah. And that's what Platoon is about. It's basically his story. He's Charlie Sheen. He is the Charlie Sheen character.
Right. So he knew, and he had a particular view coming out of that. And then we know people, you and I know people who actually did sign up for the military due to Top Gun, right? I won't name names, but I think one of the person who works with us
yes. No,
became I think an aviator, right? As a consequence, a Marine aviator as a consequence of that movie, right? And so like that,
it's powerful.
Stone was right?
Yeah. No, he was right. I mean, well, and I think this gets into like a little bit of an interesting aspect of AI is. Humans are programmable through words, through music, through stories, like clearly programmable. And, that's what a lot of politics is about and so forth. And so now you have potentially, and this is where a lot of, I think, the pushback on social media has come from. It's like, wow, here's this big new tool for programming all the humans. And, if you apply like the next layer of technology to it,
So yeah, and by the way, just to close one loop for people who are interested in this topic, so this book called Save the Cat is a very good book, but also one of the things you can do with like GPT-4, with like ChatGPT or with whatever, Bing Chat or whatever, you can actually use it. It will write you screenplays today, and what you can do, you can just tell it, write me a screenplay about the Vietnam War, and it will do that, and it will it'll start by just giving you like a generic probably Vietnam War story in a generic screenplay format. But you can also specifically say, write me a screenplay using the format of Save the Cat. Of course, it knows what Save the Cat is, and it knows what that framework and structure are, and so it will literally write you a properly constructed 15-point Save the Cat narrative on whatever topic you want. And so it actually like has the capability to do what we're describing, like for screenplays, like it actually has that capability. Now, this raises a lot of the issues that are, kind of the coming up in the strike and so forth about whether, that should be allowed and who gets credit and whatever. But like technically, practically, like it can actually do this.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
Yeah.
it's a fun thing if you want to play screenwriter at night. It actually gets to be pretty interesting in what it's capable of doing.
Welcome back after a month-long coffee break. Mark and I are back to continue the show. So in the intervening coffee break, the writer strike ended. So congratulations to everybody in Hollywood on both sides. Amazing that people get to go back to work doing what they love to do. So that's nothing but good news. So when we left off last, Mark, if you might continue on the utopian scenario, which is the scenario we all love about how AI is going to change Hollywood.
Yeah, so the utopian scenario is that basically AI is an enabling technology for a level of creativity, and also a level of output. So I would say both quality and quantity, but a level of creativity and output from entertainment professionals, creative professionals, just like light years beyond what's been possible so far. And by the way, look, like the history of Hollywood is actually the history of new technologies making new forms of art possible, right? So going back originally to just like the introduction of cameras, like movie cameras. All of a sudden, you could film stage plays, and then that became modern cinematography and filmmaking. And then look,
and movies and plays are certainly better than plays. Although
yeah.
Many people didn't like the idea of movies, but
Well, plays are still, yeah. I mean, look, plays are still a thing, and in a lot of ways, plays are more popular than ever. At least in some places. But look, movies number one just made plays available to a lot more people. But then also, film. There's things not possible on film, obviously, that are just not possible on a stage.
yeah.
And so, look, the history of Hollywood is actually a pretty utopian story. It's funny. It doesn't feel that way because like each new wave of technology has been greeted by lots of anxiety, and then sometimes anger or rage.
Yeah.
But it's all paid off, and not just economically, but it's paid off in terms of its creative potential. And so look, the utopian thing here is just start like this, which is like, what if you took the best filmmakers in the world, the best directors, the best writers, the best actors, and you just gave them a set of tools that all of a sudden let them project themselves creatively, to a whole new level. And so, and I'm sure this is already happening. I mean, like whether people admit to it or not, if you're writing a if you're going back to work as a writer and you're writing a screenplay right now, like you're almost certainly going to be in an iterative loop with a chatbot, as as you work on your screenplay, if only to do research, and then maybe brainstorming. And look, I actually think like search engines like Google had an impact on actually the quality of screenplays, which is, like it's a lot easier to write a screenplay that has like a lot of factual grounding in the real world, set in some industry or around some technology or something, right? Because you can just get access to all the information on Google or on Wikipedia. And so ChatGPT and these systems are another big step up like that. Look, if you're a director, all of a sudden you can start to do you can start to do storyboarding, in a much more accelerated way. Look, if you're an actor, quite frankly, you can start to, take control of your own material better, and you can maybe start to, do renderings of yourself. You can start to, do shorts, yourself. You can start to, make easier. Maybe if you want to work on a screenplay, it makes it easier to work on screenplays. So take the best creative professionals in the field and give them kind of these superpowers. And the question I always want to ask is like, okay, if you gave these tools to Steven Spielberg and like really unleashed him, could he make, twice as many movies, 5 times, 10 times? Would they be twice as good, 5 times as good? Like all of our great filmmakers are gated by literally like hours in the day, right? Like they're, a Martin Scorsese is only going to make so many movies in his life. And if he could make movies twice as fast, he could make twice as many. So like the utopian scenario here is like, this is a toolkit for the creative community that is going to make things possible that were at a level of quality and quantity that were just never even conceivable before.
Yeah, one of the things along those lines that I've been thinking about is that some of the movies and TV shows that we love the most are the ones that create these amazingly intricate worlds, like Game of Thrones or Star Wars, or pick a Christopher Nolan movie, and nothing would help that more than AI, in that it would kind of help you create kind of a richer and deeper experience, which would certainly enhance the viewing experience, particularly if you like to watch things 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. Well, there's always been this challenge. One of the little fun facts of Star Wars, which I find very entertaining, is George Lucas. Apparently, the way the story goes is, I heard the story from people kind of close to the situation, as they say. It may be public, but I've heard it. Which basically is, the idea that Luke and Leia were sisters was like not in the original screenplay,
Oh wow.
right? And there's the famous. I don't know if you remember. There's a famous kiss. There's a point where Luke and Leia kiss.
Yeah.
And if you watch it today, you're like, wow, he's kissing his sister. Like at the time, apparently that was filled. Like George Lucas didn't know yet that they were like brother and sister. And apparently there was a cue in the original score. There was a John Williams originally composed a Luke and Leia love theme uh, for the musical score. And then apparently also that he hadn't decided yet that Darth Vader was going to be Luke's father. And so they kind of backed into that, right? Anyway, point
Wow.
being,
The Darth Vader as his father is even kind of more remarkable that he didn't know that, because it's kind of the this classic narrative arc of kind of not wanting to be your father and then being your father and all that kind of thing, confronting
well,
your father.
Well, if you remember exactly, but if you remember at the beginning of Star Wars, another thing that reads differently now, that you know that, is that in the beginning of Star Wars, remember the Empire captures Leia, and then Darth Vader tortures Leia,
Yeah, which he probably wouldn't do if that was his daughter.
torturing his own daughter, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, so there's these things, and anyway, what's the point of it is like, look, like George Lucas, if you read like the making of Star Wars, like George Lucas put an enormous amount of time and attention into developing the script and the dialogue, and if you go back and reconstruct like how hard he worked on Star Wars and how incredible it was when it came out and so forth, like that was a creative exercise to the nth
Well, yeah,
degree
actually, so I do have a story on that from his wife, Melody Hobson, which is apparently every character in there's an entire like book that he's written on them that's in his office. So he has just like books and books and books on, like, even the most minor characters are massively developed.
And so what you have there is you have a top tier creative professional operating at the outer limits of just standalone human ability, right? Like one
Yeah.
man's ability to create and then keep everything organized. And
Yeah.
even with that, Luke's kissing his sister, and it's like, oops, right? And so, right. So anyway, to your point, you give a world builder a set of tools that let them track all this and elaborate on all this and brainstorm on all this. And exactly to your point, the worlds that they should be able to build should be like light years beyond what's been possible now, just simply because you're giving the best creators much more extensive intellectual scaffolding and augmentation that they've never had.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as a writer myself. If I had the ability to ask the system about my own book, that would have been very useful. Because it's hard to remember every single thing that you've written and how it all fits together and what might contradict, each other. And whether or not you reconcile those things is very interesting. It's interesting. He didn't quite reconcile the fact that, Darth Vader was his father, with Darth Vader torturing Princess Leia.
Exactly. Well, let me give you another use case, another thing that might work. So, another benefit. So, brainstorming. So everybody's like, well, we don't want, you don't want maybe ChatGPT writing the script itself, whatever. But one of my favorite, one of the best, obviously, shows ever made, and one of my favorites is Mad Men. And
Yeah,
one of the things,
sure.
right? And one of the things that made
Single
Mad Men
writer. That's a single writer show, isn't it?
well, he had a writer's, so it's one of those
The
shows where he
writer's
had a
room.
writer's room, but
Yeah.
he probably ended up writing the scripts himself, like at the end of
Yeah.
it, or rewriting them all, because it had such a sort of consistent, vision with such a
Yeah,
genius.
very meticulous feel. Yeah.
But one of the things that he talks about, one of the things that really jumped out from Mad Men is like how many times the viewer expectations were subverted. Like one of the things that made the show really special was you never actually quite knew what would happen, and they
Right.
kept like surprising you with all these different angles you hadn't thought of. And I read an interview with Matt Weiner, who ran it one time, and he said the rule if I recall this correctly, he said the rule in the Mad Men writing room was whenever the question was what happens next, what they would do is they would write down the first 5 ideas for the next thing in the plot on a board, and then they would cross them all off, and then they would come up with something, right?
Ah,
And so as a result, all of the obvious idea, it never did the obvious thing, right? It was
yeah.
always subverting your expectations. It was always forcing the writers to go out on the edge, right, into a creative realm that they would not have otherwise gotten to, right? And so like the level of discipline and effort required to like write 5 throwaway ideas, which
Yeah.
by the way might also be very good ideas, but to like construct 5 like ideas that might qualify for a top tier Hollywood screenplay and then throw them out to get to the 6th one, like that's serious work.
Yeah,
But like,
that's a tremendous amount of work, and
yeah,
clearly work that most writers do not put in currently.
right, exactly. But like all of a sudden, which ChatGPT will happily do that for you,
Yeah,
right? So it's
right,
like,
right.
give
Create many scenarios, and by the way, would be very good at creating the most obvious scenarios.
right, exactly. And then you just basically have ChatGPT list those out, and then you just strike all those out, right?
Yeah,
And so yeah, I think there's a level of oh, and I'll give you one more I think
that's a
about as a
very
writer.
interesting thing. If ChatGPT can write it, without you prompting it not to write something obvious, then you shouldn't use it.
Exactly. Right. You should
Yeah,
set, yeah, right, exactly. You should set a higher bar for yourself.
yeah.
Right. I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more use case that I use as a writer. Like, and I think it's just like writer's block, right? So writers always have
Mhm.
writer's block. If you read all like the books on writer's block, it's always like they have all these things because it's like anxiety about getting started, right? And so they're like a lot of
Yeah.
conventional advice for getting past writer's block is you always stop writing at a point where you know the next two sentences, right? So you're always able to pick up and run with it. But people have a hard time holding to that because it's frustrating to walk away when you're in the middle of flow. But like a way to like use ChatGPT to circumvent writer's block is just literally like, okay, have it just like have it brainstorm in the first 5 minutes of the new session.
Yeah.
Give me 20 ideas on how to start from here.
Yeah. It's funny because as an editor, I mean, we do this at work often, where somebody will be writing an idea or a presentation or whatever. I always find at some point it's actually very good creative input for me to just go like, don't do it that way, like let me rewrite the narrative.
Right.
And I imagine AI would be really, really good at that.
Mhm. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, very good.
So look, I think this is like this is like a Swiss, these systems and all the variations that are coming up, the capabilities that are going to become available over the next few years, including rendering video. We're going to get to the point now where, like, for example, an actor is going to be able to do a scan of their face and body, and they're going to be able to insert it into a 3D environment, and they're going to be able to have the machine write a script and animate a movie, starring themselves. They're going to be able to do, even if it's an actor who doesn't have any writing abilities or director abilities, like they'll be able to feature
Mm.
themselves as an actor,
Yeah.
basically in like in sort of projects to demonstrate what they can do. Directors are going to be able to, composite, movie. You're going to be able to pre-render an entire movie ahead of time on your laptop, so that by the time you
Mhm.
show up and you're pitching the studio and trying to raise the money to film the real thing, like you literally already have a version of it that's like already made,
Ah, right,
right?
right, right, right. Yeah.
Right. And so these tools are going to be like this is the thing I think people are going to miss. I think these tools are going to be so powerful in the hands of the people who are the best at what they do. Right.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, these tools are also going to be profoundly good at making the people who are only okay or people who are only inexperienced,
Mhm.
who
Yeah.
haven't yet done the full thing yet. And they're going to make also all those people potentially much better. And so, for example, to get you up the experience curve much faster. Like
Yep.
film students, as an example, film students are going to be operating at the atomic unit of making their own movies in film school
Mhm.
all the way through, full 2 hour productions, right? Including visual effects and everything else in a way that just has not been practical up until now. And
Yeah.
they're going to be able to really demonstrate what they can do.
Yeah. That's a really interesting concept, because I think we've kind of traversed that in music to a large degree. In that, if you go back to kind of classical music and orchestras, you needed like a whole set of virtuosos to to compose a piece, or to kind of render the piece completely. And then over years, with kind of simpler ideas and electronic tools and these kinds of things, so many more people have been able to enter the creative game than could have ever like written an orchestra. Like there's
Yeah.
just no like chance that you could even assemble the people. Like you'd have to get to the status of where you could orchestrate the thing, and then bring in like a genius violinist and whatever timpani and all these things. So that's it certainly opens the aperture for creativity quite a bit.
Yeah, there's this very entertaining genre of music on YouTube called epic, and it's people who literally just on their laptops are using the current production tools, and they're doing kind of the inspiration for epic music is it's like the music in movie trailers, like so it's the movie,
Ah, yeah,
it's like the
like the
music that
super
like
cinematic visual type sounds. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But like, there's people on YouTube that have like 3, 4, 5 hour like epic, kind of things playing out giant battles, like all this stuff. And
yeah,
it's like literally a person on a laptop. But to your point, the music tools are so good already that you can
yeah.
do a full orchestra and a full choir,
Amazing.
right, completely synthetically in a way that sounds, absolutely spectacular, right?
Yeah,
Like if had Beethoven had that tool, right?
Yeah.
What could he have done, right?
Right.
Or all the people who wanted to be Beethoven. Yeah,
He certainly
and
would have
so
made a lot more songs.
yeah,
There's
exactly.
no question
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's just it's really amazing actually if you're into classical music, it's amazing to watch. It's amazing to like look at a manuscript of like how those guys compose because they're composing for like a giant orchestra or something, and it's
Yeah.
like did they ever in those days did they ever even really hear a top flight performance of their own compositions? Like did they ever actually get
Right.
like how many orchestral how many people in the era of like Beethoven and Brahms and so forth actually ever got their works performed by like the Berlin Philharmonic?
Yeah.
Right, and so, like, a lot of those guys never actually heard their compositions played in a proper way,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's the same thing here, right? It's just, most people, most most people who write a Hollywood screenplay never see it produced.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
never see it on
Absolutely.
screen, right? And now all of a sudden, like, all of those screenplays could be produced, right, and
Yeah.
turned into, maybe not a movie that's commercially viable, but a version of it where you could actually sit and watch it, as opposed to just reading it, and then have that be fuel for the creative process.
Yeah. Well, actually, it reminds me of that. There's this great scene in the Quincy Jones documentary where Frank Sinatra is talking about Quincy Jones, and he says, that I knew he was like the greatest I'd work with because I gave him like this sheet music and said, the arrangement is, it's too light here. I need it to be different here and so forth. And he just literally took out another piece of paper, rearranged the thing in front of me and handed it back. He said, he's the only guy who could do that. And so, right. So the only way Frank Sinatra could get the song he wanted was to like work with one guy in the history of music who could do that thing. But as the tools progressed, I don't think anybody, takes a piece of sheet music and rearranges it anymore. There are easier ways to do it, and that kind of opens up a lot of possibilities.
Yep, exactly. So anyway, so to wrap a bow on this, like, yeah, just like creative fuel. What I like to call augmentation, like an augmentation to the creative capabilities, including and maybe especially the creative capabilities of the very best creators, right? And then giving them a level of superpower and giving them a level of expressiveness and giving them, not just an upgrade to the quality of the work that they do, but to the speed with which they can do it. I think it's probably greatly underestimated right now.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Yeah, it's one of those things when you do something a certain way, you don't realize how difficult it is, and then you get a new tool and everything changes. And look, there's always positives and negatives. Like a necessarily slow process has some things to it. Having written on a typewriter, written by hand, written on a typewriter with whiteout, and written on a word processor. Like they're all different processes, so you do get some benefits, but generally, the better tool is the better tool.
Well, and I would just say it was almost nobody ever goes back, right?
Nobody goes, well. There are like a few people
A
like with a
few.
manual. A few people won't even use like an electric typewriter, right? They've got some crazy manual thing, but that's more like a personal psychological issue, I think.
Right. But
Yeah.
almost nobody. Like I said, the exceptions are so rare that you actually know who they are.
No, exactly. It's kind of a thing. It's a character in a movie who does that,
Right.
probably more than an actual real person. Moving on, we have a question from, I don't think this is his real name, Adult, Adolt. And Adult asks, what do you think is the biggest argument for, quote, saving Hollywood? And I could start with that, or would you like to start?
Why don't you start? I haven't. Go ahead. Yeah, start.
I would say it's one of the great assets of the United States. So if you love America, you should probably love Hollywood in the sense that, it's been the vehicle that we've had for exporting our culture, our values, our way of life. And if you like those things, if you live here and you like those things, that's an amazing kind of an amazing industry and, amazingly positive for the country. It's kind of a weird question in that sense, at least to me, in that you kind of, as a country, why wouldn't you want to be a cultural force if you liked the country that you lived in? And, it kind of gets to this question of, okay, what culture do you amplify? And obviously, Hollywood won't amplify every aspect of America, or maybe not all the points you love, and maybe amplify some of the things you don't like. But, net, it's, this is who we are. And, having the greatest creatives in the world right here with us telling our story is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, we both have friends. We both have friends who grew up behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. Maybe you,
Yeah.
I know you have some stories in particular, but like the
Yeah.
right. What was the? Let me. What was the impact of American entertainment with respect to with respect specifically to the Cold War with the Soviet Union?
Yes. Well, let me give you one example. So my friend Christian Gheorghe grew up in communist Romania under Ceausescu, and the it, basically, that environment was so repressive, that and they would do things like they'd come in to your house at 1 o'clock in the morning to check your power meter and look for, like, if you had any like albums or videos or anything imported from the US. And it's just like communism. I think people don't people have this communist fantasy. We kind of covered this a little on the last podcast, but like communist reality, if you ever want to know what communism is really like, just talk to somebody who lived in it. And one of my favorite stories he has is they wanted to get a color television set, long after color TVs came out, and they went to this place called the Department of the Betterment of the People, which decided whether you would get a color TV. And they basically lectured him for 3 hours why you can have one. But anyhow, the thing that changed his life and actually caused him to escape was he was bootlegging. He was bootlegging albums and films, and one of the albums he listened to was Pink Floyd's The Wall, and then one of the films he saw was Rain Man. And the thing that I remember about Rain Man that he said is, the Las Vegas scene just blew his mind, that there was something like that. Because one of the things in communist countries that you experience is everything is gray. They don't even the clothes. They don't come out with colorful clothes, because why? Like, there's no reason to. There's no economic thing to do anything that looks good or this or that or the other. There's like literally creativity is completely suppressed. Even in the kind of most basic fashion ideas like colors, which also goes back to the Medici time when the communists of those times outlawed color, like just flat out outlawed it. But when he saw the Vegas scene, it was just so spectacular, and everybody in communist Romania was saying, well, that was fake. They just created a fake city for the movie. That there's no way that place really exists. It was just so unbelievable. And somehow he got to the conclusion that no, Las Vegas did exist, and that was a real place. And he actually escaped Romania by swimming across the Danube River, which is just like what a crazy, unbelievable story that was.
But his knowledge of what was on the other side of the river was from, quite literally, Hollywood.
From Hollywood, yeah, no, Hollywood kind of, I would say, give him a new life, a free life, which right. He would never have had at the same time in the same way.
And then, you could say, look, that's all in the past, but you could also you could also broaden this argument out, and you could say, look, like every culture, including ours, like has some level of repression going on, right? Like, yes. we live in our time. There is certainly a long list of things that you both have to say that you don't believe, and things that you believe that you can't say. We have our own kind of repression. My Chinese friends, because it's it's always today it's like the equivalent of the USSR. People talk about as communist China, and there's all these things you can't say. And my Chinese friends always are excited to point out all the things that I can't say, despite the fact that apparently I allegedly live in a free society.
Yeah, you can say them, just not out loud.
Exactly. You want to make sure the door is closed, the window shades are drawn. And so, look, this is always the case. Like every society has some set, there's some set of rules, like there's some set of, kind of assumptions, rules, there's some enforcement, for the norms. And then there's the role, it's the role of the jester, right? Like, in the medieval era, it was the role of the court jester. And the role of the court jester, was in two parts. One was to entertain the court, but the other was the court jester was the person who could say things that nobody else could say. And you could kind of and you could kind of couch it as like, he's a jester, so he's joking, right? But it's like, he's joking, haha.
But
not really, right? And so, subversion of cultural norms, right? By the way, for better or for worse, but like subversion of cultural norms basically happens through entertainment, right? And it happens through people who are able to like paint pictures of realities that like don't actually exist, and are able to tell stories that aren't like literally true, like that you basically cultures basically encode, basically all of their new messages and all their counter arguments to the status quo, kind of in these stories. And so if you don't have that process, then it would be very easy to fall into a process of cultural stagnation, and repression. And if you do have that process, the culture necessarily will stay vital and interesting. I mean, look, I would say like Dave Chappelle, would maybe be
Yeah,
like,
no, I was say today's court jesters are the ones who are freeing us from some of these repressive forces.
right. One of the things you and I know you've been to more shows than I have, but you and I went to a Dave Chappelle show years ago, and in addition to like he's just like super funny, and so you just find yourself like laughing uncontrollably because he's so funny. But the other thing that I always find so fascinating about him, or I'm sure Chris Rock's shows are like this too, is like they'll say things that you're not supposed to say, right? And then the feeling in the audience is like this overwhelming group relief.
Yeah, right. Like,
Right.
wow, great, you said it.
Well, it's like lancing a boil or something, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, finally. You see, I always enjoy this when you see the concert videos of some of these things, which is when Chappelle does his specials, it'll pan to he'll say something that normal people are not allowed to say. Regular people are not allowed to say, and
Yeah.
then they'll pan to the audience, and the look on the audience face will just be like naked relief. It'll just be like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody's laughing, and everybody knows whether what he said is true. And everybody thinks that it's amazing that he said it.
Yeah.
And everybody's laughing because it was funny. And it's this whole package of it's like a giant release valve.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I
yeah, no,
anyway,
it is amazing. Right, right. He's freeing everybody's mind.
yeah, exactly. Right. And that's what the great movies do. That's what great music does. That's what great comedy does. Like
Yeah.
that, at the end of the day, like that is a very, very, very big contribution to the evolution of our societies. And I think we would really miss it if we didn't have it.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, yeah. No, Hollywood is freedom. That's why we need to save it. Although I think it'll be okay. Then moving on. So Fabius Maximus asks, and this is actually interesting question because I think it's actually kind of a misunderstanding, but I'm going to read it as he wrote it or she wrote it. How will the job losses in Hollywood due to AI compare to those in other industries during previous waves of automation?
Good news. So
Yeah, the question's not true.
yeah. So the good news is the question is actually, the question is it's a very obvious question and obviously a very valid question. But the good news is we have 300 years of history on this now. We have 300 years of basically increased levels of industrialization, automation, computerization. And there are more jobs in the world today at higher wages than ever before. So this goes to the sort of classic. It's what economists call the lump of labor fallacy, which basically is this idea that the argument goes that there's basically only a fixed amount of work to be done in the world, and if a machine does some of it or if an AI does some of it, then there's less for people to do, and it'll cause job loss. It actually turns out that's not what happens, and that's not what happens because of the economic principle of elasticity, which is the process that's quote unquote causing job loss, or let's say causing changes in jobs, is also bringing prices down and increasing production levels. And then it turns out that basically increases the size of the economy, that increases the size of that industry. Look, another way to put this: the industries that have higher levels of automation also grow faster,
Yeah.
right? Because they're able to accelerate their process of building more products at cheaper prices, and therefore selling more, and therefore being bigger industries and employing more people. Than the industries that have less technology. And so this goes right back to that's the general argument that automation doesn't create job loss and AI won't create job loss. In fact, quite the opposite. The net job creation will be way up. This goes back to where we started on the utopian thing, which is just like, look, like what if all of a sudden the great creator can make 5 times as many movies, or what if all of a sudden every movie gets twice as good? Right.
Mhm.
And all these different scenarios you can paint, and the result of that will be a massive expansion of the industry.
Right, a big
Right.
increase in demand, sure.
Exactly. Right. You induce demand, like increased supply induces demand. And so look, all the creative fields are like this. Like, does anybody ever complain that there's too much great music? Right. Like, no. Like,
Yeah, mostly the opposite.
mostly the opposite, right? Like, there isn't enough. There should be like a lot more great music. There should be a lot more great movies. There should be a lot more great everything. Right, and there's this industry of all industries. I mean, it's the market is the entire world. The market is 5 to 8 billion people.
Yeah.
With like with enormous spending power and with enormous time. And enormous love for these forms of media. And so the result of this, and again, this is the same kind of this is the thing that an industry has to go through, and people have anxiety about it and so forth. But like on the other side of this kind of change, typically what happens is a much larger industry with like way more employment, way more output, I'm 100% convinced that's what's going to happen, for sure in the tech industry and for sure in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, that's so interesting you bring that up because I recently went back and watched the AFI 100, which is I think it's American Film Institute top best 100 movies of all times. And two things struck me. One was the fact that they could put that list together and that it would be like a reasonable shot at it was just amazing because there aren't that many movies. And then the other thing that struck me is like some of the movies I really didn't like. So, maybe it's just me. I'm like, got some, brain defect or something, but and then there were definitely movies off the list that I like much better than movies on the list, but it's just, it does speak to the fact that, there should be more great movies. There definitely should, given the talent of humanity. But the bar to make a movie is so high, and requires so much money and so much coordination, and and lawyers, that it is quite difficult.
Now, look, having said that, to kind of give the devil his due, like, look, the jobs will change.
Yeah,
Right. And so, the analogy, like if I were going to like steel man, against my own argument, the analogy here would be like, look, the blacksmith industry never recovered after the introduction of the car.
yeah.
Right. Like, look, there are still horses, right?
Making horseshoes is not what it once was.
But making horseshoes is not what it once was. And there were
Yeah.
blacksmiths who had perfectly good jobs making horseshoes who all of a sudden, when cars came along, like they didn't adapt. And if you were still trying to make horseshoes 10 years after the car came along, like you were probably in trouble.
Yep.
Now, what happened was the car created far more jobs, right, than it displaced. And so, for example, the number of car mechanics was orders of magnitude beyond the number of blacksmiths, right?
Yeah.
And then the downstream effect of the car was like very profound, and that the car led to the creation of industries. The car led to movie theaters. The car led to retail chains. It led to malls. It led to suburbs. It led to hotels. It led to amusement parks, right?
Fast
It led
food.
to What's fast food? Exactly. It led to, all kinds of economic growth and job creation that would not have been possible if we were still riding horses. And so it is a great case study of like the net aggregate job creation from the car was like profound over the alternate world in which people had stuck to horses. But look, having said that, there were blacksmiths who ended up stranded on the wrong side of that. And so and look, it's just like a part of, and then you kind of want to play this back in history. It's like, okay, what should we have done? What should society have done about the sort of disappearing blacksmith jobs, right? And from a societal standpoint, the last thing on earth you would have wanted to do is to slow down the progression of the introduction of the car to protect the blacksmith jobs. Like that would have made everybody worse off, right? To protect a very small, what ultimately turned out to be a small number of blacksmith jobs. But look, at the same time, you did have blacksmiths who couldn't adapt, and so there does need to be some consideration for the fact, that it is a change, and then there needs to be, there need to be paths for people to be able to, to be able to adapt, and a lot of the blacksmiths and the blacksmiths' children, right, have to have a path to be able to get onto the side of the new technology.
Yep. Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, Simon Bonanno, these names are all interesting, although this may be a real name. How do you see AI plus blockchain redefining IP royalties for Hollywood creators?
Yeah. So Ben, why don't you start with this? Because I know you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, so I think, look, and I'll go to like the simpler version of Hollywood. I think is the music kind of side of Hollywood, which is royalties in the music industry have been just a huge complexity, way money has been stolen, other kinds of things. In that, if you make a song, there are generally many, many people involved in that song. And they, from writers to producers to other singers and, people, and they all, particularly in today's world when we don't really have, it's not like the Beatles, most people are individual kind of artists that have a collection of people that work with them on something. And those things are all recorded on a contract and stuck in a drawer somewhere. Like, it is really not managed, even in a database that other people can access, like, i.e. the people who contributed to the song. And so what ends up happening is the money kind of comes in to like the label, or like whoever the entity is, and then you're relying on them to kind of distribute the money back out to you. And I'll just tell you, a lot of money gets lost. My brother, who's in the music industry, has done literally hundreds of audits on behalf of his artists, and never has he not retrieved money that was being like held kind of whatever, intentionally or unintentionally, against the actual agreement in the contract. So there's that part of it. But then there's a second part of it, which actually shrinks the industry quite a bit, which is, let's say that you're the NBA and you want to then license that song. All of the people who have to sign off on that, or like if you're Ben Horowitz and you're writing a book with a rap lyric in it, getting approval to pay for that lyric that you can put in your chapter is a heck of a process. It's very, very difficult. And so it just slows down. It creates tremendous friction in the ability for artists to make more money off their work, because, if you could sell it easily, it would be better. If those of you have ever been in Europe, you'll notice that the music is like songs, but not by the people who singing them. Why is that? It's because, it's too hard to license it. And so that's more like money that gets lost from the artist that they could have, but this kind of system is bad. So what a blockchain would do in particular, I think, for the royalties is you could just have these contracts be open, published on the blockchain, have the money come into a smart contract, and then get sent out to all the participants automatically. No third party involved. It's just, the agreement is enforced by the game theoretics and mathematical properties of the blockchain, and not subject to, bureaucrats, lawyers, record companies needing to make like a profit in the quarter. Like, none of those things come into play. And I think that, it's a very kind of powerful tool in that sense. Look, I think AI, on top of that, basically makes all those solutions much easier to build, because it is a tremendous enhancer on like creating code and these kinds of things. And so I think that, those would go hand in hand. And I imagine Hollywood is very similar. There's a huge kind of conflict in the recent strike was just about, okay, what are there are no royalty payments anymore. Like, where'd they go? And, kind of having a contract that could do royalty payments would enable, potentially other distribution ideas.
Yeah. Could you describe, for people who haven't heard it, just describe what Grimes is doing?
Yeah. So my understanding of it is she is basically licensing. So if you want to do AI Grimes, which is basically train an AI on Grimes's voice, and then make your own Grimes song, she'll auto license that to you. And she'll do that, using blockchain, and then she will basically split the profits. And I think it's a 50-50 split, if I recall. But so basically, that's a kind of very innovative way to say, hey, rather than run from AI, let me just say, look, you can use it. Just acknowledge the fact that the idea of my voice and my style, like, I invented that. So pay me for that. You don't have to pay me for the song you wrote. You can get the money for that. And I think, like, one of the really exciting things about that is, if you're a musical artist, in that way, AI actually immortalizes you. You become an instrument, and not just like a singer at one point in time. You become an instrument that people can use. You become a violin or a saxophone. So that's actually a super exciting idea. And
So,
kudos to her
and
for
that's all registered through a block. That's all registered through a blockchain-based system, the way you're describing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the advantage of that is you can use it right, like as a creative, without having to call a lawyer or do a contract or negotiate terms or whatever. The terms are all published, and you can opt in or not. But it's as simple as as getting a violin. Like there it is. You buy this instrument. It's Grimes.
And this could run, I mean, the system that does this could run for 1,000 years, right? And it could just, it's always a 50-50 split, and new people could
Yeah,
pick it
yeah,
up
right,
anytime
right,
they
right.
want.
And she could,
Right,
on her deathbed, she could redirect it to somebody she likes,
right, right.
and all that kind of thing. So, right, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's quite an amazing amazing possibility when you think about all the things you might do with that.
So I have this scenario I just can't get out of my head, which is so first of all, like I'm not like I'm not a pop music, like all the music I like is people are all dead, but I'm not like up to speed on pop music and don't try to be, but everybody always talks about how smart she is, and I never quite knew what that meant, and then she came out with this thing, and I was just like completely blown away. Like it's one of the most innovative things I've seen anybody do
Yeah,
inside tech, and so I was like, okay, like yes, she in fact is a genius. This is amazing.
yeah. She
But
she went right to the strong form of the idea, right?
yeah,
Like she
100%.
skipped over all the. We see like entrepreneurs running around with like weak forms, half baked, or not half baked, but like
Right,
half measures. And she
right.
went right to the full thing. Like, this is what it ought to be.
And then my understanding is that part of the way she was able to do this was she does all of her own stuff, right? She publishes her own music. She has
Yeah.
her own. She doesn't she doesn't go through a label.
Right,
Uh,
right, right. Well, she owns her masters.
she owns her
It's the
masters, right? So she's retained a lot of legal autonomy, which is
yeah.
kind of again doing things the hard way, for a new musician. But like she's pulled it off. So I have this kind of fantasy, I don't know, utopian dystopian scenario in my head, which is basically if she's able to do this because she owns all of her own rights, and then the existing, music labels or whatever, they just like drag their feet and they don't like embrace this fast enough.
Yeah.
There will be like archaeologists in 1,000 years, right, who will look back over the sweep of the next, millennium, and they'll be like, why was there only one musician?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why was there only one singer? Right, because what will happen is the number of variations of her that will exist in perpetuity expressed through this technology, tracked through this and enabled through this system, there will be thousands and then millions of grime songs,
Yeah.
and they will just make up the overwhelming majority of like the entire recording catalog. And 100 years from now, it's just like it'll just be like the most advanced music will all be like Grimes music. um, right? Like, and it'll just like swamp the whole thing. And so it'll be like, in 1,000 years from now, it's like they'll find some reference to, Frank Sinatra. They'll be like, well, who was that? We've never even heard of him, because like all the music we listen to is like Grimes. Right. So, maybe I'm carrying that too far, but
You are, but I think it's illustrative of the power of the concept.
but to make the point, like, look, like if the world is gonna if the world's gonna evolve in this direction, like it's gonna really matter who like picks up the flag and runs with it, versus who
Yeah.
doesn't. And this, at least to me, this feels like it feels like she fired the starting gun on a process that's going to play out over a long period of time.
Well, I think
And
it also gets to the kind of value of independence, right? Like this is the interesting thing about the creative industry that's very different than the tech industry is like when we invest in a company, we get a piece of the value of the company. When somebody invests in an artist or a movie, they also get like these intellectual property rights, which is a kind of a different, the nature of it is different, right? Like, so it's like, okay, I get your name and likeness. I buy that in exchange for advancing you money to make a record, which is really kind of in some ways, and that, by the way, that advance is recoupable. So it's a debt slash equity instrument. But I don't just get the equity, I get you. And so it's a construct that, like, I think AI causes you as an artist to really rethink and say, okay, my independence now is far more valuable because what I create can then be remixed. And in order for me to get an interest in that remix and that recreate and that, further use, I actually have to be independent. So Titus Tetchers says, does AI mean artists who don't want to follow the suicidal Hollywood conformism on everything from COVID to woke get a chance? That, by the way, that comment in that commentary is not one of the podcast hosts. It is one of the audience members. We are not taking responsibility for Titus Tetchers.
But we're excited that he was able to express himself through the medium of asking questions. I mean, look, like this ought to be, if it goes back to the little bit of extending what you've been talking about, but like, look, this ought to mean that tools will now be in the hands, for example, some people who want to make movies. Like, it should now be possible to make the equivalent of Hollywood quality movies on a fraction of the budget. Right.
Yeah.
So just take the economics. Like it ought to be possible here within a couple of years, to make entire full length movies, basically on your laptop, completely produced, with like whatever actors superimposed into the thing. Like a couple of years. I don't know. I'd say probably 5 years out that starts to tractable. By the way, there's a movie. People like this kind of thing. There's a movie I watched a little while ago. It's I believe the title of the movie is Monsters of Men. And it's this movie that the special effects guy shot to prove a point. And he shot it like in the jungles of Vietnam or something. And it's like a killer robot, like monster movie, yeah, like a Predator, kind of movie, but with robots. It's with lots of like violence and action scenes, and killer robots stomping around, and gunfights and so forth. He shot it. I think it has, if I'm remembering properly, it has 2,000 VFX shots. And by the way, they're really good. Like you basically like it's the very least TV caliber, if not full Hollywood caliber, but it's like really good. It's like, killer robots stomping around the jungle. It looks great. And the guy who did it is a VFX pro, so it looks great. But he shot the entire thing. It has 2,000 shots, and I think the total budget of the entire movie was $2 million.
Wow.
Right. And so it was sort of a demonstration of like what one person with a computer can actually do these days.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't think we're that far out from a tool set that's going to, as I said, like a tool set that's going to let any film student basically have a movie, that's sort of a Hollywood caliber, at least from a production value standpoint, kind of thing by the time they leave film school. It's just sort of a basic thing that they can do on their laptop. I think the technology on that's going to actually evolve very, very quickly here. Now, look, what the Hollywood people will say, the counter argument from the Hollywood people will say, well, what will happen is the audience expectations will go up, right? And so all of a sudden it won't be good enough to have a $300 million, blockbuster the way you have today. Instead, it's going to have to be $1 billion blockbuster, and it's going to have to be like super spectacular and all this and that. It's like, I don't know. Like, there have been many...
It seems like that can be a both, though, right? Because, remember, the beginning of the internet, one of the very first shows on the internet was South Park.
Yes, right.
Which is, by the way, still running today. And that thing continues to be the lowest budget animation possible, with them doing all the voices themselves. So you couldn't do it any cheaper. And they never actually amped it up, in the entire time they're doing the show. So I think the low end and the high end are both always interesting.
So there's actually they did a so here's what so they did this thing. So the original South Park was literally, it was cardboard. Like it was literally animation. It was like layers of cardboard. Yeah. And so they did move a few seasons in. They did move to CGI because they needed because they wanted to be able to do the episodes quickly. They wanted to be able to do them because a lot of the great things about South Park is they can do an episode that addresses something that happened that week. Right. So the topicality of it has been really critical over the years. And so they did move to a computerized production process. But what they did was they did 3D computer graphics modeling of cardboard.
Perfect.
Because what they had to do, I actually heard this from one of the guys directly. So what they did was their audience was used to seeing layered cardboard. Right, that was the aesthetic of the thing, and it actually turns out if you just do like animated version of that without the layering of the cardboard, it looks differently and it doesn't look real. And so they actually did 3D modeling of what it's like to actually have layers of cardboard. And so to this day, if you watch it, if you like zoom in, you don't notice this as you're watching it, but if you really look carefully, they'll have like the layering and the shadows like are still in there as if it's actually being produced of cardboard. And so, look, that aesthetic worked and stuck. And I mean, look, this is the argument I always have with a lot of my friends in Hollywood, actually, is like, look, a lot of the breakthrough movies that redefine Hollywood were made on a shoestring budget, right? So Easy Rider, which sort of inaugurated what they called New Hollywood in the 1970s. Like that was made for basically no money, Dennis Hopper. And then there was like Reservoir Dogs, which kicked off the
Yeah.
indie boom of the 90s, and that was Quentin Tarantino. Basically the whole thing was shot in a warehouse, right? And you think you saw all kinds of stuff that happened in Reservoir Dogs, a bank robbery and all these things, and like none of it actually, you never actually see any of it. You just see the sort of aftermath of it, which kept the budget small. George Lucas's breakthrough film was American Graffiti, which was again a tiny little budget, and South Park was a tiny little budget. And so this is the thing I'm actually most curious about. Like I am very excited to see what Steven Spielberg does. But the thing I'm most excited about is there have got to be more, Dennis Hopper's, Quentin Tarantino's, George Lucas's out there. And they it's just like the founders we work with, where they'll have some vision when they're 20 or 21 or 22. But if they have to wait 10 or 15 or 20 years to get to the point when they can raise the money to be able to build the thing, like they may, and they may not ever do it because they may just get pulled into the existing status quo system, back to the original question. But, the idea that any 20-year-old with an idea is going to be able to make a movie, like we could see a creative flowering here, across many kinds of media that is really extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think kind of, going back to the original question, about kind of this, like, okay, will this change Hollywood? I think that it kind of gets to this larger question of society. And I think that, historically, the unhealthy, societies that end in, kind of the murders of their own people and these kinds of things are the ones where, oh, there's an idea that I don't like that somebody's put out. And so my idea is to censor and repress and crush that idea is the worst kind of societies historically. And the best kind of societies are, oh, I have the tools and the distribution to get my own idea out there. And you talk about this a lot. And actually the creation of the United States is one of the great things about it was, all of the kind of founding fathers had their own personal newspaper, which they would write under. But like if they didn't like somebody else's idea, they just wrote their own idea. And that's, that's a free society as opposed to a highly repressive society that says, oh my God, somebody says that's dangerous language. That's, this kind of thing. That's that kind of thing. Let's kill it. And that's, once you think that's the way, that it generally always ends badly. It always ends with, kind of this kind of mass, mob justice, mass murder, these kinds of things.
Yeah, years what they call years. Cambodians called year zero. Yeah, look, the American Revolution was the printing press really took off as something. Just the actual printing, like the printing press, is a product that many people could buy and run print shops, and then ultimately run newspapers like that. That was a 17th century phenomenon, and I think that's, to your point, that's exactly correlated with like the fact that the United States was constructed in the 17th, 18th centuries. Like it was sort of a direct byproduct of that.
Yeah, right. Kind of the cultural foundation of the whole place. Okay. Do you think people care? This is from Scott Westman. Do you think people care about the provenance of content? And do you think that will change over time as AI becomes more prevalent?
Yeah. Provenance of content.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't pretend to know exactly what Mr. Westman meant by that.
Well, there's a bunch. I mean, it's like, yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, take it most basic level. Where did it, like, what was the origin? Where did it come from? I mean, where this comes up very specifically is around like deepfakes, right? So, like, and by the way, like, there've been people have been like raising concern about deepfakes for the last few years.
Yeah,
they are starting to work. Right. And so, like, look, did this politician actually say this thing? Like for sure, you're going to care a lot. There, and you're going to need an entire, and we have companies working on this.
I'd say there'd be a huge thing going into the presidential election of 2024 for sure, because by October they're going to be working perfectly.
Yeah, and look, by the way, like, look, there are people who will say this entirely technology problem. I guess I would say is like, look, people have been misquoted forever, right? Like, I don't know about you, Ben, but like I've been misquoted in the press many times.
Well, you're actually misquoted on a quote that I gave.
Oh, which one is that?
I referred to I need to explain this carefully so I don't get attacked again by the Washington Post.
Oh
but,
yes.
or the New York Times, I think it was in that case.
No,
But anyway,
it was the
we
Washington Post.
okay. What I had said, I was referring to. So there was this kind of uh, the kind of Reddit group on who was following at that time GameStop referred to themselves. They used an anagram for traders, which was retard, or traitor, which was retard, and they called themselves the Retard Revolution, which was kind of like the anagram of a traitor. And as the Washington Post did hundreds of times in referring to them, I referred to them as the Retard Revolution because that's what they call themselves. And Mark got absolutely ripped and an attempted cancellation by a Washington Post journalist for using the word retard, which he did not. I did. But I said it in a context that everybody in like polite society used. And, I certainly wouldn't use it to, attack a person's character or describe a person or denigrate a special needs individual. That's not what it was. But, that does happen from time to time, misquotes.
Right, and then I got attacked for something you said, which I had not said.
Yeah, that you didn't say at all, right?
Right. So first of all, this reporter's running around saying, literally, the reporter's running around like we're in fucking we're in like junior high with like, Andreessen said the R word.
Yeah.
Right. As if this is finally the excuse to like, cancel me and ostracize me and, get me fired and all the rest of it.
Yeah, there were certainly better excuses to do that.
There always are. So, and then literally my response was like, no, like I actually factually did not say that. Like it's not true. It was this other guy who I happen to know.
Yeah.
But
well, it's very kind of you not to mention my name, given I was the other person on the show, right?
but fortunately, exactly. But fortunately, there was a recording of the clubhouse room at the time, and so there was literally the recording, so you could go back and you could hear that I hadn't said that. And I don't know, Ben, if you remember, but the reporter in question, I'm sure this tweet has long since been deleted, but this reporter was basically called out. A bunch of people figured this out, and this reporter has sort of fans and detractors, and so a lot of this reporters, just detractors on Twitter, were like, you got it wrong, you need to apologize. And this reporter literally said, like, well, she said something like, well, I can't be expected to keep all these old bald white guys like separate.
It's very offensive.
Yes. Clearly hate speech, by the way. Clearly racially and follically loaded hate speech, being and of course overt ageism being deployed there. But it's actually it's a funny story, but it's actually it's like a micro version of this, right? Which is like, okay, who said what and when, right? And who knows? And like, is it like who actually said what and when? Who were these people? Right. And, look, in the future, it's going to be, was Mark logged in? Was Mark logged into the system at the time? Was Ben logged in? Were they actually speaking? Is this actually their voices? Did they say this? Is this the real recording? Right. And so, I mean, even outside the realm of politics, like just like basically who does what and when, who says what and when, like it's going to be very, very important to like track to track all this. And so I think the answer to that, is, yes, absolutely 100%. Like systems for establishing provenance are going to be extraordinarily important. Like the, future society is going to basically run on them.
And luckily we have a perfect technology for establishing and tracking provenance in a way that is unbiased and can't be corrupted, which is the blockchain crypto technology. And so, hopefully, in our zeal to ban everything, we don't ban that.
Well, this is the irony, is that many of the people who are the most worried about the provenance problem are also the most intent on banning blockchain. Right. There's a high overlap.
For the kids in the room, it's important to understand the basics about a technology before trying to ban it.
Exactly. And so all of the people worried about deepfakes. Yes, exactly. So all of the people worried about deepfakes should definitely be 100% opposed to outlawing blockchains, because that is the obvious answer. And because everything else is prone to manipulation and abuse. And so maybe at some point the powers that be will figure this out, but we'll see.
And this kind of leads into the next question from Dee Fellman, which is, what do you think is the future of copyright protection in Hollywood?
Yeah, I think, quite honestly, I think we probably covered a lot of this already. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's going like it's going to continue to be obviously very important, but it's going to change a lot because people are going to want to deploy creative assets and likenesses and voices and personalities and so forth, and content and do remixes and do combinations
Yeah.
like at like far higher variety than in the past. And they're going to have
Yeah.
the tool set to be able to do that. And so this goes back to this kind of thing, which is there is a creative flowering that's possible here and a gigantic growth of the industry that's possible here. But look, it is conceivable that that the laws, either the current laws or new laws will prevent that from happening. And for people in these industries, I think they should think hard about that.
Andrew writes, will this finally get us out of the nostalgia loop, i.e. Barbie? I think he meant e.g. Barbie for those of us who are Latin experts, but
There's this guy Paul Scalise, the Lindy Man,
Mhm.
and he did this very interesting thing on what he calls stuck culture. And it's actually it's actually a thesis that the internet basically changed the evolution of culture. And basically his theory is as follows, which is basically, well, he has the strong version of the story, and he basically says culture stopped in 2005.
Hmm.
And he basically says, like, if you play a video game from 2005 and a video game today, it's basically the same game. If you listen to, a musical, pop hit from 2005 and today, it's basically the same song. If you, if you bought a cell phone in 2005 and you buy a cell phone today, or, whatever, 2007,
Yeah.
the iPhone 2007, like the iPhone in 2007 and the iPhone today, they basically look, they look exactly the same. It's a little bit thinner, but it like looks exactly the same. If you bought a car in 2005 and a car today, it's basically the same car. If you watched an action movie in 2005 and an action movie today, it's the same movie. If you buy a shirt in 2005 and you buy a same shirt, buy a shirt today, it's the same shirt. And he's like, look, like this is really weird. Like it's been nearly 20 years. And like, why does everything look and sound and feel the same as it did in 2005? Because if you back test this idea, like, we all know, if you grew up in the US, like, you're of a certain age, like you can tell at a glance the difference between something from the 1950s versus the 60s versus the 70s versus the 80s versus the 90s. Like they all have a very distinct aesthetic and a very distinct design. And basically
Yeah.
his argument is like, basically that process of sort of design evolution has basically stopped across a lot of fields. And to the extent that you buy this, his explanation for it basically it's the impact of the internet, but in a very specific way, which is if somebody's interested in something weird and offbeat and different, you can get that on the long tail of the internet. Right. And so if you're interested in like some weird new kind of music or some weird new kind of like graphic design or some weird new kind of like software or some weird new kind of whatever, like there's like some subreddit or Discord group or something or Twitter micro community or like whatever where you can like go down. There's a million of these tiny little rabbit holes that you can go down. Right. And amongst all those rabbit holes, there's still tremendous cultural creativity happening, but it's fractured across all these little rabbit holes. And then if you're a large company trying to bring a piece of clothing to market or a movie to market or a video game to market, you basically have become risk averse. You basically don't want to deviate out on the cultural fringe because the people who want cultural, right? You see what I'm saying? The people who want the cultural fringe are no longer your
Already
audience.
have it. Yeah.
Already have it. And so the people who are left are the people who only want the mainstream, the most mainstream normie thing they can possibly get. And so from that standpoint, and this is, the critique, the standard critique here, of course, that you see, Paul argues that this principle applies across many fields of creativity, but the Hollywood version of this is the complaint you hear all the time, including from people in Hollywood, right? That it's basically that Hollywood movies, like an extraordinarily large percentage of them are either franchise, they're either Marvel, Harry Potter, a small number of franchise kinds of things, or they're remakes, right? Or another term for a remake is like a nostalgia act. And so and so look, and you could say this about the Barbie movie, which was like apparently I haven't seen it, but apparently like a lot of people think it's obviously a very well made movie and very creative in many ways, but like it's consistent with the stuck culture thesis that of course the well made movie that got made all this money and got all people in to see the theater was like a plastic toy from the 1950s, like
Yeah.
right. It's stuck culture, right?
Right.
Right. It would not conceivably have worked had it been about, a new toy or a new toy introduced in the last 15 years.
Right.
In fact, if you were going to make a movie today about a new toy introduced in the last 15 years, what would it even be? Right. Like,
Yeah.
There is nothing, right? The toy company, the argument would go, the toy companies are recycling the old concepts just like Hollywood is.
Yeah.
And so anyway, what this basically says, it's like a barbell theory. It's basically you have a massive amount of cultural fragmentation happening on the long tail, and then you have correspondingly a massive amount of cultural centralization, risk aversion, and sort of nostalgia,
yeah,
right, happening at the head. Now, look, having said all that, Oppenheimer, disproves, Oppenheimer, somewhat disproves the thesis, right? Which is like, I mean, and Oppenheimer was backward looking in the sense of it was about something that happened in the 1930s and 1940s. But like, look, it was an original Hollywood movie. It's not like Oppenheimer was like top of mind for everybody, right? From the last, 50 years. No, right? Like, he was a real historical figure from way back. Look, Oppenheimer, I think, is going to top $1 billion in the box office and is like, a fantastic success and is going to sweep the Oscars and so forth. And so you could argue that Oppenheimer disproves the stuck culture thesis.
Mm-hmm.
The counter argument to that is, if you're Christopher Nolan, you can make the original movie on that kind of budget and have that kind of success. Right. But like, name the next one. Right. And the next one was Barbie, or before that, the next one was the new Top Gun movie, which again, like a great movie, but a remake sequel of a movie made 35 years ago. Let's pause there and say, like, do you buy the thesis? Let's start with like, do you buy the thesis? And then let's diagnose what happens next.
I do in pieces, but I think it's it's not 100%, right? Like, so there are things that leak through. There's there's certainly like a lot of the stuff in music going on with things like Afro beats is at least seems different than what we had in 2005. And as you said, you've got things like Oppenheimer and so forth. I think, Kanye clearly made an entirely new shoe with the Yeezys. Like, I don't think there's any arguing that. So now he is him, he is who he is. So, maybe he's a Christopher Nolan of fashion or that kind of thing. But so I think a lot of it is true. Right. A lot of it is true. The convergence of many creative art forms into kind of like a single set of ideas is definitely happening.
Yeah. And then basically the lens that I put on it, and Paul talks about this a little bit, but I'll, just with the investor kind of hat on, or the sort of business hat on, the lens that you put on it is economic incentives, right? Which is, if you're going to deploy $300 million to make a movie, and you could deploy it into another Marvel movie or another Transformers movie, right? Or you could deploy it into an original screenplay. In this context, like, you are overwhelmingly likely to deploy it into a known franchise, right, or a remake.
Right. Because you have built an audience, yeah.
Right, and you have enormous risk aversion, which is you just don't know if there's an audience out there for something that is genuinely new.
Gets you out of the hits business.
And
into the franchise business, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that I think that, and that's why I'm so fired up about the sort of augmentation aspect of this, or the tools aspect of this, is I think if you bring down the price of originality, the cost of originality, like if you make it possible for people to exercise creative originality at a fraction of the price, I think that has a potential to take a creative medium that maybe is in this kind of stuck in this loop. And I think it has the potential to maybe unstick it in a very exciting way, because all of a sudden you can have the creativity. If you can have the creativity at a fraction of the price, all of a sudden the risk aversion fades, right? And you just have like a lot more production of a lot more original work.
Yeah.
And so that's my optimistic view, which is like these tools are actually the answer to this problem.
Okay, let's see. Making original content is expensive. This is an interesting geopolitical question. AI will make it very cheap to outsource. How do we keep the jobs in America?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, like, well, let me ask you this, like, why is Hollywood, why is American content so dominant? And then of course, the next question is, and then of course, is it like?
So this is a really interesting question right now, because so for my lifetime, America has completely dominated global culture. Like, they're massively, if you go anywhere in the world, everything, all the cultural changes, for those of us who lived and were able to travel internationally in the 80s, 90s, 2010s, now 2020s, what you've seen is an amazing transformation of cultures all around the world towards American culture, like everything, fashion, music, art, movies. I'd say that
very recently, that's really starting to change. And I think, music, which is sort of a little bit the cutting edge of culture, everybody I know in the music industry goes, well, this is a big change in the last 5 years, is that many of the biggest artists are coming out of Mexico, South America, Africa, Korea, like in force, and those artists are actually now exporting their culture to a large extent, back into America. I was just, I would say in like hip hop, like UK rap has now kind of probably gone past American rap, at least currently, in terms of quality. And it's certainly different. Like it's their culture that they're exporting, not our culture that they're importing at this point. And I think a lot of that has been a function, in music at least, of streaming music, the internet, these kinds of things, where the distribution monopolies have all been in America. The cultural distribution monopolies have historically been U.S. based, and that's given our creatives a massive advantage over kind of the global creatives. I think that there's a lot of negatives to that. To us controlling global culture. I mean, it's been awesome for us, but it's I would say people around the world probably have a different view of that. So it's been an interesting change. Yeah, and I think more voices. I'm generally of the view, kind of, the world is kind of shrinking, with airplanes first and then the internet, and so we're all kind of in this together in a sense. And the kind of strong belief that I have is that, getting all the ideas out there and heard is very, very important if you want to get to the best ideas. And I think that's true in politics, and it's true in, in creativity and music and culture. And so, having, if AI is a force for that, I think that's a strong positive, at least in my view.
Yeah, there's a thing that comes to mind as you talk about this. It's Marshall McLuhan had this term called the global village. And, the global village was basically like when the entire world was wired together, like it would be like everybody's in the same village. And it's actually interesting in that the term village just sounds kind of quaint to our ears. And so it's like everybody's kind of in the same, town square or whatever. But village has like an older meaning. Like a village is a place of like intense conformity.
Yeah.
Right. Like a village is a...
Good point.
Right, like for anybody who grew up in a small town, right? Like the nature and characteristic of a small town, like when you see fictional portrayals of a small town.
How big is your town, Mark?
1,309 people, including the cows.
That's small.
The actual reality of life in a small town is everybody's in each other's business all the time, and everybody's watching everybody else, and the social conformity pressure is super intense.
Yep.
And the sort of what the tall poppy syndrome is like in full effect. And it's like this is very kind of primal human wiring, right? Which basically is, well, the survival of the town, from an ancient history standpoint, the survival of the town or the village matters more than the survival of the individual, and so you need people to really come together as a collective.
Confucian.
What's that?
It's Confucian. The good of the individual must be subverted for the good of the whole. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And in Western prehistory, it's also very similar. Like, Western prehistorical, basically villages, cities, what they called cities, which were really villages. They were this weird kind of hybrid of like, they were sort of communist and fascist kind of simultaneously.
Yeah.
They were communist because they had a share. You didn't have a critical mass of a market economy, so you had a lot of sharing. But they were fascist because somebody was in charge and could take other people's heads off. And so it's this sort of form of communal living, that you look, and in the modern era, a lot of people who grow up in a small town like that, a lot of them move to a bigger city in part because they want more cultural diversity, and they want more ability to express themselves and have original ideas. Yeah. So McLuhan used the word global village, and he kind of used it as a negative, which is he's just like, look, we're going to slam everybody together into the equivalent of a village, but like we're going to have this like hyper level of conformity, where you're just going to have you're going to have tall poppy syndrome exercised globally.
Yep.
Right. And so, and this, and again, this is kind of consistent with the Paul Scalise stock culture thing. Everything's just going to become extremely self-referential and risk averse.
Yeah, it's almost like for every one creative, there are now like 9 billion critics.
Yes, that's another way to put it. Yes, exactly right. Everybody else is a critic. So yeah, look, I think there's a big argument. There's an argument for just literally, I think there's an argument for like the health of any creative medium. There's the argument that you actually want cultural, you want some level of like cultural differentiation. You want some level of geographic differentiation, right? You want like, then the local environments need to be at some level of critical mass to be able to like attract top end people and do great work. But you actually want like, quote unquote diversity. You actually want like cultural diversity, geographic diversity, and you actually want places, to feel, you actually want it to feel like it's not the only place. And in fact, you actually want a competitive effect, where the different places are actually competing with each other to try to outdo each other. And by the way, like, look, in film and actually, especially in television right now, it's like, look, like, the Korean, like Squid Game was like this, massive breakthrough, but like there is a, what it showed is there is a creative community in Korea, built doing like top ends, like, full on Hollywood quality, television entertainment. Now Israel has its own, scene like that. The UK has its own scene like that. Stockholm has its own scene like that. And so, and a lot of the great, American TV shows the last 20 years are actually remakes of a show from the UK or Israel or something like that. And so, it showed like the creativity in that field, I think maybe shows the advantage of having multiple locations.
And by the way, a lot of those shows are very original, like Fauda out of Israel and Squid Games out of Korea, right? Like they're not stuck culture.
Yeah.
There is some new culture coming from other regions.
I was with an Israeli entertainment industry couple recently, and that are very involved in all this. And they're like, well, and I was like, wow, I really like what's happening in Israel. And they're like, well, what show do you really like? And I knew as I was saying it, I was like, oh, well, Fauda.
Yeah.
And they literally, they laughed and they were like, yeah, we knew that's what you were going to say, because that's what everybody loves. But also they said, look, like, is it bad that the most famous show that wins all the awards coming out of Israel is literally about like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Like is it a cliche? Like, how do they put it? Like, is really that's the thing that we have to offer to the world, is this like horribly fucked up, geopolitical thing that we have going on with people killing each other. Like, is that really what we're known for? And I was like, look, like, and is it like bad that that's like the peak of our creative capability is that? And I was like, look, like, it's your point, like that wasn't going to get in America. That wasn't going to get made in America, right? Like, America has,
certainly not correctly, certainly not with nuance as that show is. Yeah.
Exactly, and for people who haven't seen the show, it's about this Israeli special forces unit that goes undercover in the Palestinian territories, actually as Arabs, and it turns out there is a real Israeli special forces unit that does that, and the guy who actually is the star of the show was the guy who actually did that in real life, and then they're actually filming in and around those areas. And so if you're if you're from like the US or whatever, and you just like would have no way to ever experience this kind of thing, like you're really getting a slice of life of something happening that you would never get exposed to. And so I'm like, look, like it's real, like it's a real thing. It really matters. It's really important. And I would never have gotten to see that otherwise. And it's on top of being super relevant on every possible, geopolitical front, everything, it's like incredibly well executed. It's clearly creative professionals at the top of their game. Like, it's amazing. And like, the answer, anyway, the point being is like, the answer maybe is like, we need like 1,000 times more of that kind of thing, right? Coming from everywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that you alluded to is like, if you think about that show and anybody who's watched it, how enhanced their understanding of what's going on in the region as opposed to these cartoon versions we get, either in the press or from politicians, is profound. And like that kind of thing is completely lacking on, say, the Ukraine-Russian war right now. Like, do you know, like, I'd like to think, I know what's going on, but I certainly don't believe I know from like all the Twitter experts and what I'm reading in the press and so forth. It'd be great to have, real geniuses who understand like humanity and human nature and who are great creatives, making, helping us understand these things and helping us understand the world. And by the way, this new technology will be an enabler for that.
By the way, let me close on a movie recommendation, actually. A movie that I just love, and I think it's on I'm pretty sure it's still on Netflix. It's a movie called Bust, Buybust, as in like it's about a bust of a drug buy. So Bust. Yeah. It is a Filipino, Philippines. It's shot in Manila. Philippine filmmakers, actors, actresses, and it's an action movie shot on a shoestring budget. About the drug war in the Philippines, which is like super intense around, Duterte and like, tons of controversy around all that. And but it's an action, it's a wall-to-wall action movie. The tagline for it people talk about is it's John Wick set in the Manila slums. And it lives up to that. And again, it's not like, this is not a Hollywood, this is not like a $200 million movie. This is like a $2 million movie. Like they shot it, with very little money. So you need to put yourself in that mindset, but it is 2 hours of like just wall to wall. And they literally shot it in the Manila slums. Like they shot it on location. And it's like, it's like politically relevant. It's like socially relevant. It's incredibly well acted and performed. But it's the kind of thing where you watch it after 2 hours and you feel like you've been in a place that you never would otherwise get to go in a very kind of visceral way. And so anyway, if the future of the decentralization of the industry is more projects like that and Fauda, I think the world is actually going to be in very good shape.
That is awesome. And I've got like one quick closing anecdote. So I took a friend of mine who I grew up with to the Adele show in Las Vegas over the weekend, and he said, "Wow, I'm so surprised how down to earth and like she curses and does all these kinds of things. I thought she'd be so prim and proper with that British accent." And I was like, no, she has the low class British accent, not the high class British accent. She's from the hood. And he goes, "Oh, you mean like the people in Top Boy?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And so it's bringing the world, closer together, a much better understanding of each other. So
there we go.
Kudos to global distribution of creativity. All right. Well, that is our show for today. And thank you for listening. And please join us next time on the Marc and Ben Show.